Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for this important joint committee hearing. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We're using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. At public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing of Daily News, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Legal Intelligentsia prior to the hearings. It can also be found on PHL Council. I note that the hour has come. Ms. was called, although you can sing if you like. And please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak or sing.
Yeah. Councilmember Bass.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Good afternoon. I'm present.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Helen Gam.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I, too, am present.
Councilmember David O.
Yes, I'm present. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good afternoon, chairs and colleagues present.
Chair of the Committee on Transportation and Public Utilities, Kenyatta Johnson.
President, good afternoon, everyone.
And Chair of the Committee on Finance, Derek Green.
I am present. Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. A quorum of these two committees is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is a joint public hearing of the Committees on Finance and Transportation and Public Utilities regarding resolution number 210653. Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please read the title to the resolution?
Resolution number 210653, resolution authorizing the Committee on Finance and the Committee on Transportation and Public Utilities to conduct joint hearings regarding the sustainability and diversification of the Philadelphia Gas Works.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. Before we begin to take testimony from the witnesses we have here for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded, and because the hearing is public, participants and viewers should have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for any question or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must also only be used for this purpose. Also, I'd like to state that we do have a number of people who are here for this very important hearing. Please make sure that you keep your audio on mute so we do not interrupt or disrupt the hearing. This is a very important conversation that we are having here today regarding diversification of Philadelphia Gas Works and its future. And it's interesting that we are having this hearing on February 9th, 2022, because on February 10th, 1836, that was when Philadelphia Gas Works was started. And it was started with a few employees and putting gas lights on 2nd Street. And so PGW has always been an institution owned by the public that's been able to transition with times. It started as a lighting company and then transitioned into a heating company. And when we look at all the issues and challenges that we have for Philadelphia Gas Works, we can see a future transition as well. And so the goal of this hearing is to really review and have a public conversation regarding the diversification study. I want to thank the Office of Sustainability and all the partners of the Diversification Study Working Group on coming together to put together this study. It happened during the course of a pandemic, and we had a lot of great participants who provide a lot of great input in this conversation. Because of the challenge in bringing together both E3, who was the entity, one of the entities that worked on the study, as well as trying to put together two different committees to have this hearing, we will have a further hearing to provide additional input for those from the public to provide their perspective on the study, and we'll look to get a date and time for that hearing in the future, so that way we can have additional opportunities to have this conversation. We're also working with the Office of Sustainability to see how we can publish the written testimony provided for this hearing online, to give those who are not able to be at this hearing the opportunity to hear and opportunity to read some of the conversation that occurred during the hearing. I want to thank both Councilmember Johnson, who is the chair of the Committee on Transportation and Public Utilities, as well as Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson, who is the chair of the Committee on Environment, for their support and work regarding this important topic. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge Councilmember Johnson to see if he has any comments, as well as, I believe, Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson as well.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Before the other chairman, for the record, I am present and a member of both committees, as well as being a gas commissioner. I am here.
And thank you. And Councilmember Jones, if you would like to provide an additional comment as well after Councilmember Johnson, because you have also been a part of this work through your role not only as a member of these two committees, but also as a member of the Gas Commission. But with that, we'll go to Councilmember Johnson and then allow others to provide comments.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for your hard work and your dedication on this issue. It's an issue of environmental justice, and so as it relates to the city of Philadelphia, we can do a better job. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership with PGW. I want to thank you for the leadership with Seth Shapiro. And I know with Councilman Derek Green on the case, we will become a more environmental friendly city of Philadelphia. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Jones.
Mr. Chairman, I don't need to make a comment. I'm excited about the discussion that we're going to have this afternoon. And I also thank you for your leadership at the commission.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones and Councilmember Johnson. As you know, and I think others know, that the city of Philadelphia has and owns the largest municipally owned gas utility in the nation. We have hundreds of thousands of ratepayers, many who are moderate to low income. And so how we balance that issue of providing efficient and reliable energy through our dedicated workforce who are members of Local 686 and exempt staff, and do that in a way with a very seasoned infrastructure and a very seasoned city, is a challenge, as we also try to address the issue of climate change and all of the other variables and impacts that has on our city. So I look forward to having this conversation, which is the beginning of a conversation that some of us have been having for some time, now bringing this conversation in a much more public way through this diversification study to better inform the public regarding some of the challenges and opportunities that we have as we try to address this issue going forward. So I look forward for today's conversation, and thank you all of the attendees, all the partners, all the individual organizations who are here to provide their perspective on this very important topic. With that, Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please call the first witness we have to testify this afternoon regarding resolution number 210653.
Christine Knapp, Director of the Office of Sustainability for the City of Philadelphia, Amber Mahone, Principal at the Energy and Environmental Economics, and Seth Shapiro, President of PGW, and they will be joined by Nikki Lindmeyer from E3 as well.
Okay, thank you, and we'll have each person testify in that order. Ms. Knapp, if you would just state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. I'm Christine Knapp, the Director of the Office of Sustainability. Good morning, Chair Green and Chair Johnson and members of the Committee on Finance and the Committee on Transportation and Utilities. I'm here to testify on resolution number 210653 regarding the PGW Business Diversification Study. I'm actually going to be joined by Nikki Lintmeyer, the Senior Managing Consultant at Energy and Environmental Economics, or E3, who served as the lead consultant on the study. And Nikki and I are going to be sort of jointly sharing the project purpose and background, the findings, and the recommendations of the study and the next steps that we're taking. So I'll start off and then pass it to Nikki, and then I'll finish up our testimony. So as you may know, Philadelphia is serious about being a climate leader. We recently received an A rating from CDP, among only 4% of cities in the world to receive that top rating. Last year, with the release of our Climate Action Playbook, we updated our goal to commit to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. This goal is in line with the Biden administration's goal and is also what science indicates is minimally necessary in order to stave off the worst effects of climate change, such as extreme heat and more frequent and more severe storms. Meeting this goal will require decarbonization in all sectors, including from thermal energy. At the same time, PGW's gas usage per customer has been declining due to a host of factors, including appliance efficiencies, conservation efforts, and a change in climate. In fact, in PGW's rate filing in 2017, they cited warmer weather as a cause for decreased usage. These issues will only intensify as temperatures continue to rise and policymakers place a stronger focus on reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. As a gas-only utility, PGW and the city as its owner need to understand how the utility can provide necessary services in a low or no carbon future while also thriving financially, protecting low-income residents, and retaining its 1,600-person workforce. With support from the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge, the city and PGW came together to explore this challenge through the PGW Business Diversification Study. The goals of the study were, 1, to examine technological pathways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from heating, cooking, and other uses for natural gas in line with the city's climate and air quality goals, and to evaluate the impact of those pathways on PGW's current business model and customers. 2, to identify near-term business strategies for PGW that help to sustain jobs and maintain customer affordability. And 3, to identify near-term promising pilot projects for PGW that have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, benefit low-income customers, and result in long-term workforce opportunities. I'll now ask Nikki to share her screen and provide a brief overview of the diversification study. You'll have that enclosed slide deck in our submitted testimony. And when Nikki is finished, I'll come back to me and I'll finish out the testimony.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Nikki Lintmeyer. I am a managing consultant at Energy and Environmental Economics, and I was a project manager for the PGW Business Diversification Study that was developed by E3 together with portfolio associates and eConsult Solutions. I am joined today by Amber Mahone, who is a partner at E3. And through this presentation, I will walk you through the key findings and recommendations of our study. The City of Philadelphia has set ambitious climate targets. Reaching carbon neutrality by 2050 requires transitioning away from fossil fuels, such as natural gas. The combustion of natural gas in the city contributes to approximately 24% of city emissions. Through this study, we analyzed how PGW, that distributes natural gas to Philadelphia's homes and businesses, can reduce greenhouse gas emissions while safeguarding customer affordability and supporting PGW's workforce. Our analysis resulted in the following key findings. First, from a literature and regulatory review, we found that diversifying a municipally owned natural gas utility is a multidimensional challenge that lacks a silver bullet solution today. We also found that a diverse set of existing and emerging technology and business options will be necessary, and as PGW's needs and role evolve, so too must its regulatory landscape. From our analysis of greenhouse gas reduction scenarios, which I will go on in more detail later, we found that achieving net zero emissions in the city of Philadelphia is challenging, but technologically feasible, and that near-term action is required in order to achieve net zero by 2050. It is important to note that household decisions and other market trends, along with legal and regulatory environments, will have a big impact on the city's trajectory to net zero. Each of the greenhouse gas reductions pathways we analyzed presents trade-offs between cost and feasibility, as I will show in more detail later on. And in the long term, PGW's current legal and regulatory structure and cost recovery model may pose challenges, mainly related to customer cost and affordability. From our analysis of business diversification strategies, we found that the long-term need for alternative models can be partly addressed through near-term promising diversification strategies, ranging from options such as expanding weatherization services to providing strategic electrification services. We found that these options on the long term, however, do not result in sufficient additional revenues for the utility to cover its costs. As mentioned, we found that achieving net zero emissions is challenging but technologically feasible through a mix of options. These options range from electrification on the bottom of this chart, where customers disconnect from the gas system and adopt electric appliances, to decarbonized gas, which is on the top of this chart, where PGW would inject renewable natural gases into the system. In between those options, we examined a hybrid electrification strategy, where customers adopt heat pumps that are paired with a gas furnace to supply heat in winter. And we examined a network geothermal strategy, where PGW would operate a shared network of pipes delivering heating and cooling through Philadelphia's buildings. We found that energy efficiency is a foundational component to each of these strategies. We evaluated each of the 4 scenarios based on 4 evaluation criteria that were developed together with the working group and stakeholders. For the first criteria, impact on greenhouse gas emissions, we found that all 4 scenarios have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in support of the city's climate goals. For the second criteria, air quality, which we evaluated qualitatively, we found that mostly scenarios that involve electrification improve air quality. That in contrast to a decarbonized gas scenario that does not see significant improvements compared to today. For customer affordability, we found that all scenarios result in challenges on the long term under the current regulatory framework. A decarbonized gas scenario sees small impacts on the short term, but may lead to significant changes in the commodity cost of gas as more expensive gases are required on the long term to achieve the city's carbon neutrality goal. An electrification scenario requires higher upfront costs for customers, though customers may see longer-term bill benefits compared to other decarbonization options examined. However, this scenario poses challenges for those customers unable to electrify, as the costs of the gas system are continuously shared over fewer customers over time. A hybrid scenario may mitigate these effects, but still sees upfront cost challenges and an increase in energy bills on the long term. We found that a network geothermal scenario requires capital-intensive installations, but the cost to customers depend on how such a system would be financed, for which additional research is required. In terms of impact on PGW revenues and workforce, we found that a decarbonized gas scenario and a hybrid electrification scenario would keep the current gas system intact. Network geothermal systems may even lead to additional workforce opportunities for PGW. An electrification scenario, on the other hand, would lead to a long-term reduction in PGW revenues, with potential implications for the workforce on the long term that require further study. Our project team considered a variety of alternative business models for PGW. These models range from options that extend PGW's current business, such as providing RNG operations, providing network geothermal systems, or weatherization services, to potential new business models for PGW, ranging from providing strategic electrification services to utility-led financing to community solar. We found that each of these options may provide a way for the city and PGW to facilitate part of the low-carbon energy transition while supporting jobs and value to customers. However, these options do not result in sufficient additional long-term revenues for the utility to cover its cost. I would like to note that the PGW diversification study was supported by a dynamic analytical tool developed by E3. This tool allows users to explore different futures for PGW, for example, by providing inputs on types of scenarios and fuel mixes, which results in outputs related to PGW's consumption forecast, greenhouse gas forecast, and revenue forecasts. Through this tool, that is a dynamic user interface. Users can explore different futures for PGWs. Going forward, based on our evaluation of options, we recommend the following 3 near-term promising pilots for PGW. The first is a weatherization program with novel financing opportunities, where PGW and the city will work together to support low and moderate income customers in the upfront financing and implementation of weatherization applications, such as home insulation. The second is a feasibility study for network geothermal systems, where PGW investigates the technical and geological potential of block-leveled network geothermal systems, as well as the utility financial model for such a system. The third is a local decarbonized gas program, where PGW would work together with other city departments, such as streets, to convert city waste into biomethane, making use of local resources to reduce carbon emissions. Our study team also makes the following additional recommendations to promote actionable next steps. First, we recommend to define midterm greenhouse gas reduction targets for PGW. Second, we recommend the city and PGW to consider ways to better align the legal and regulatory constraints and cost recovery mechanisms of PGW with achieving the city's climate neutrality and air quality objectives. Third, we recommend the city, together with PGW, to collaborate on a greenhouse gas reduction implementation strategy for Philadelphia's buildings. And lastly, we recommend the city to work closely together with PGW to conduct a PGW workforce impact study. Thank you. That ends my presentation. I'll hand it over to Christine.
Thanks, Nikki. So to pick up where she left off, the city is committed to working with PGW and other partners to take next steps on the study's recommendations. To advance the pilot projects, we are currently exploring federal funding opportunities to support the weatherization program pilot recommendation. We are meeting with philanthropic organizations to find funding for a feasibility study for network geothermal, and we'll be convening a meeting with PGW, the Streets Department, and the Water Department to explore that local decarbonized gas program pilot recommendation. On the other recommendations, we are launching a workforce impact assessment with technical support from partners in the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge and with Local 686 to get a deeper understanding of how different decarbonization scenarios would impact PGW's workforce. We're advancing a variety of building decarbonization policies and programs, including recently joining the White House and Council on Environmental Quality's new Building Performance Standards Coalition. We're also beginning conversations with the Law Department about reviewing PGW's regulatory structure. And lastly, we've encouraged the Gas Commission and the Philadelphia Facilities Management Corporation to work with PGW to set greenhouse gas reduction goals for the midterm. I'd like to close by thanking the members of the Diversification Study Working Group. I won't name them all, but I do appreciate the diverse expertise that was brought to this project. And I'd also like to thank the many stakeholders that participated in a workshop, in an online survey, Gas Commission Town Hall, and that all those that provided feedback on the study's draft materials as well. It's clear that our goals for a sustainable future and the concern for the complexity of the potential solutions are shared by many across the city. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. Before we go any questions, we'll hear from Ms. Mahone and Mr. Shapiro, and then we'll take questions from members of council.
So Amber is not testifying separately. Amber and Nikki are part of the same team, and because of Amber's jury duty, we weren't sure who was coming today.
Problem. Okay. We'll go then right into Mr. Shapiro. Ms. Mahone, if you have any additional comments, or Ms. Lindmeyer, please feel free. After Mr. Shapiro, we'll have questions from members of council.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilman Green, Councilman Johnson. Thank you to the other members of the Joint Committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today. I miss you guys, and I wish that we could be in person, but it's good to you nonetheless. And I'm really excited that we're having this conversation. As you guys know, I'm relatively new to management in PGW, but have nearly 2 decades on the board. And I've been very excited to sort of have this conversation and move this effort forward. I'm excited that we're sharing what I think is really important information and facts and findings. And I'm excited to talk about what they mean for both the city of Philadelphia and its residents. So the goal is to talk about some of the specifics for the diversification study and what it means in the bigger picture. But at first step, let me start with the end and let me start with what the next steps are. And Steen and Nikki talked about some of this. So first thing, sort of first and foremost with respect to the study identifies 3 pilot programs, and PGW is committed to pursuing each one of the pilot programs. Number 2, the study highlighted some really significant obstacles and challenges, and we think the collaborative approach that the study sort of are indicative of is the right way to try and collectively find that path to solve some of those issues. And then the third one, and I want to say this very clearly, we at PGW are committed to achieving the mayor's goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. So with that said, let's go through some things. First of all, it is irrefutable that climate change is one of the most significant threats to our civilization. To address that threat, we have to use every greenhouse gas reduction strategy there is. Growth in renewables alone cannot be the solution. It is equally irrefutable that right now, today, natural gas is perhaps the most significant tool for greenhouse gas reductions worldwide. The overwhelming majority of the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that we've seen over the past few decades have come from the transition from coal and heating oil to natural gas. Now, some folks have the luxury of focusing myopically on one facet of the issues, but when we're making real decisions, and you guys make real decisions and we make real decisions, we have to weigh all of the facets, and we have to focus on real facts, and we have to focus on the repercussions of the policy decisions we make. So let's talk about some facts. Less than 5% of Pennsylvania's electric grid right now is produced by renewables. 40% of Pennsylvania's electric grid is produced by natural gas converted into electricity. About 20% is produced by coal, and about 20% is nuclear. The growth that we're seeing in renewable generation cannot keep up with the growth in demand for electric. And if you think about the exponential growth we're going to see in electric vehicles, right? It's just not going to keep up. I haven't seen a single credible projection that shows a decline in natural gas usage for electric generation over the next several decades. In fact, just last month, McKinsey put out a study that said the demand for electric will be 2 times what it is today in 2050. There's not a single projection for growth in renewables that gets you to where demand is today, much less where demand will be then. And so when there's a push for electrification, it ignores the monumental truth that's not going to change anytime soon. So much electricity is created through burning natural gas, and in fact, it burns more gas making electrification than it makes in homes. Let me try and put a finer point on that. So if you start with 100 BTUs, British thermal units of energy, right, in natural gas molecules, and you take that 100 BTUs of energy and you burn it in an electric plant to create electricity, and you transmit that electricity across lines to Philadelphia, and then you use that electric in your home to create heat. You are getting 36 BTUs of heat in your home, okay? If you take that same 100 BTUs of natural gas and you transmit it across gas lines and put it into your home and burn it in a natural gas boiler in your home, you get 91 BTUs of heat. So 91% efficiency versus 36. Simply put, it means electric heat burns more gas regionally than gas heat. And when you hear people talk about site versus source, that's what we're talking about. Let me demonstrate it another way. So the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission calculates energy use in Philadelphia. And so the last numbers they gave are as follows. Electric energy produced 46,000 MMBTUs, million British thermal units, at a cost of $1.3 billion and emitted 5.1 million metric tons of emissions. Okay? Natural gas in that same period produced 79,000 MMBTUs of energy at a cost of $730 million and emitted 4.2 million metric tons of emissions. So natural gas produced close to twice as much energy at half the cost with fewer emissions. The right decisions based on facts and think about repercussions, right? Those facts alone, we think, demonstrate what an integral part PGW plays in meeting the city's carbon reduction goals. But we're also excited to talk about the opportunity to lead the effort, right? I've actually said to people who have asked about my transition from real estate into energy, and I've said, if you care about climate and you care about achieving these goals, perhaps the single best place to be is sitting at PGW with the chance to make a difference. So we have been leading this area. This is not new territory. We've been leading this area for 186 years, right? And so let me talk a little bit about the things we're doing. Annually, we eliminate methane escape investing in our infrastructure. Last year, we spent $85 million and replaced 37 miles of cast iron main, right? And by the way, just so you understand the equation, every 5-ish miles that you reduce eliminates 23 metric tons of methane, right? In fiscal 22, we spent $10.8 million weatherizing our low-income customers' homes. In fact, over the last 10 years, we've spent $75 million weatherizing 25,000 low-income homes at no cost to the owner. These efforts have contributed to our overall energy efficiency, and just those have reduced emissions by 920,000 metric tons of CO2. We are looking at our own footprint. We're consolidating. You guys have seen some of our facilities consolidation plans. We're consolidating 8 buildings into one central operations center, and that's going to reduce the carbon footprint of those operations by 50%, and over the life of the 25-year lease, save our customers about $100 million. We continue to do creative things and innovative things like advancing CHP, combined heat and power. You may have read about the project the National Park Service is doing, converting their buildings to natural gas. That's going to save the federal government $750,000 a year in operating expenses, and it's going to reduce their energy usage by 114,000 MMBTUs. We're a partner in the US EPA's Methane Challenge program. We continue to look at things like renewable natural gas, responsibly sourced natural gas, and hydrogen. We also recently launched an Energy Innovation Lab incubator competition where we partnered with Temple University's Small Business Office to identify and support creative entrepreneurs and startups who have innovative energy reduction concepts. And we've awarded our first 2 winners in that program. We're proud of what we've done. But the next question we need to ask is, what are we going to do to further our sort of shared goals? How do we further diversify our business and tackle this challenge of climate change while we still maintain the sustainability of this asset and the affordability of energy for our customers? And there's a couple of things you need to know, and I think the report did a good job of highlighting some of this. Remember, we are not a private company. PGW does not have profits. We do not have stockholders. The only dividend we pay is $80 million to the city of Philadelphia. We operate at break even. The cost of operating this utility are spread on our customers in a manner reviewed and approved by the Public Utility Commission. That means if our expenses rise or our revenues fall, the direct result is an increased cost to our customer base. And as you guys know better than I do, our customer base already has one of the highest energy burdens in this country due to poverty. We understand that our efforts to further diversify our model are not going to happen overnight. It's why we're so grateful for this collaborative opportunity. We've been wrestling internally with these issues for decades, and so we really appreciate this level of engagement from you and your colleagues, and also from other key stakeholders. I want to thank certainly you, Gas Commission Chair Green and Gas Commission Member Jones. You guys have been spectacular partners in this. We appreciate your involvement in all things, but particularly diversification study. The rest of your fellow Gas Commission members, I want to acknowledge Philadelphia Facilities Management Corporation, of which I used to be a member, and those members work very hard and are very supportive. Local 686, our union is a spectacular partner, and none of the things we get accomplished without their participation, including this study. And I have loved the employee and private citizens and passionate stakeholders who've been engaged and involved in this diversification study. Climate change is a generational challenge, and it will require a seismic shift in the way we live and the way we create and deliver the energy we use. Natural gas, PGW, and our employees will continue to be a driving force in reducing emissions. We are wholly bought in to the idea of carbon neutrality by 2050. We subscribe to facts. We have a responsibility to make sure that achieving that goal does not result in untenable repercussions to our core mission, which is providing safe, reliable, affordable energy to our customers. Thank you guys so much for having. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you or any of your colleagues have.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro and the other panelists for testifying this morning and providing that insightful information and overview of the diversification study and as well as Philadelphia Gas Works perspective. I have a few questions, and I believe some of my colleagues may also have questions. If so, please indicate in the chat feature. I will start with Ms. Knapp. One of the things that I think about the different initiatives that we have, and some of this work is going to have to occur through policy change. I think about my sister is a physician. She lives in California. She has her third electric car now. And it wasn't that long ago, if you were in the city of Philadelphia, if you saw an electric vehicle, you would think, what is that? Now, depending on almost every neighborhood in the city, there's an electric vehicle. But the reason, from my observation, my research, how we've been able to get to that point is because it's been a combination of both policy initiatives at the federal level and also to some degree state, and also the private sector investing in electric vehicles. So when we have a municipal gas utility, the largest one in the nation, probably the largest in North America, probably one of the largest ones on the globe. So what steps are we taking as a city to work with our federal partners in reference to our federal delegation to start to make some of those policy changes to make some of the things that we're talking about as part of the ideas coming out of the study come to fruition, and then also reaching out to other entities and maybe some investor-owned entities in order to move that forward.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. I would say the policy front, we obviously have been working on building decarbonization as an office priority for a number of years. The city's benchmarking program has been in effect for almost 12 years, and the recent building energy performance policy that passed through council in 2019 will have its first compliance year in 2022. So there are some pretty significant avenues that we've taken from a local policy perspective. But I think to your point, Nikki showed that chart right at the beginning that showed our 2050 goal. And if we did everything that's in our climate action playbook, we still have that gap there. And what we actually have seen, we put that report out about 3 weeks before the Biden administration took office. After they took office and President Biden made a commitment to having a carbon-free electricity grid by 2035, we actually redid that chart and found that almost that entire green section that was our sort of gap in hitting that goal was eliminated by the federal government taking that level of action. So it just really highlights that we can do a lot on our own, but we can't do it all, meeting these goals. And so having state level and federal level policymakers part of this work is really important. And it hasn't really been something that we were able to really do much of in the prior administration, but I think we certainly have an administration that we have the same carbon neutrality goal. I think there are a lot more opportunities, partly through policy, partly through the funding that we are now seeing flowing from the infrastructure bill. And hopefully, if we ever get to Build Back Better as well, some additional funding opportunities there as well.
And this is for any of the panelists if they want to jump in, because I think this is something that we need to take leadership in trying to push these issues. Because if we're going to get to some of these goals that we need, we're going to need to see additional opportunities for renewable natural gas, for weatherization, for decarbonization, for geothermal. I think the infrastructure bill provides some opportunities, but we really need to have some of our fellow partners take some leadership in helping to make that happen, especially with this current administration. So, Mr. Shapiro, I wanted to touch base with you. I know PGW has been working on some different initiatives. I know the renewable natural gas pilot was an initiative that PGW tried to address, which provides some space in that decarbonization gas lane. And I believe the pilot was about $500,000. And I believe PGW purchased about $130 million of gas a year, if I'm correct. I want to get some perspective on what are some of the regulatory challenges from a state law perspective. And I know we have an oversight entity with PUC, the Gas Commission, PFMC, and PGW, which is a collection of assets. But if you can give some perspective on that pilot and what was the response to that pilot from the PUC and what led to it not being successful based on the PUC perspective.
Thanks, and that's a great question. We probably don't have time for me to give an adequate explanation of all of the regulatory hurdles we face. As you guys are familiar, we have city oversight in terms of the Gas Commission and City Council. We have state oversight certainly in terms of the legislature that can pass bills, but also Public Utility Commission. And then we also have federal oversight in terms of PHMSA and FERC. When PGW created, it was 186 years ago, and while we've changed a little bit, the documents that we operate under didn't contemplate sort of the realities that exist now. So there are constraints in terms of the businesses we can in, right? We're constrained to be in the business of delivering natural gas. We are constrained geographically within the city limits. We are constrained in terms of what other businesses we can get into in terms of putting other financing on our bill or doing any financing together. We have all sorts of procurement requirements that keep us from doing things that our investor-owned counterparts have the ability to do. You see a lot of them doing creative things in terms of changing revenue streams or changing their service area or changing what they do, and we don't have this. Now, what we have said, both in conversations during the diversification study process, but then also in all of our internal discussions, is that as I've talked about the monument nature of this challenge, and so we are trying to ignore temporarily the regulatory hurdles and say, if they didn't exist, what would we want to do? And we're working through that. But our idea is to say, find something, identify the hurdles. I have faith, having worked with all of the regulatory bodies I mentioned before, if we came up with a good solution and said, this is the assistance we need, whether that's assistance we need from you guys or assistance we need from the PUC or the state legislature or assistance we needed even from the federal government, I think the mentality is there to do that. You asked specifically about RNG, and you had the facts spot on. We'd like to add a very, very small amount of RNG into our gas supply, and I think the PUC commissioners wanted to be able to say yes. And in fact, if you read the opinion that they issued, they said all the right things. They understand the significant nature of this too. Unfortunately, one of the regulatory hurdles is that there is a least cost supply requirement, right? And so they said because of that, we can't approve it. And that is something that we're now having conversations. My staff and I have gotten calls from legislators saying, hey, we're thinking about a legislative solution to this that maybe will allow us to do some other things that may not even be legal. There's other solutions that other utilities have started to propose, which could be either doing renewable natural gas and selling the RINs, selling the credits to bring the cost into the same cost as natural gas. Now, you should know we do have, in some of the energy choice stuff that goes on for customers, you do have the ability as a customer to buy from a third-party gas supplier. And if you chose to buy from a gas supplier who's using RNG, that is a way that as a PGW customer, you have access to RNG.
Definitely sounds like a conversation we need to have with our Philadelphia delegation, others around the Commonwealth regarding this issue. Just have one last question, and then we'll hear from Councilmember Bass, then Councilmember Gim, then Councilmember Jones. One of the aspects of this transition is that we need to find ways for people to use less energy. I think Mr. Shapiro gave a lot of information regarding the challenges in reference to we don't have enough energy sources as it is. But in order to look at ideas like electrification or solar or geothermal and decarbonized gas through the RNG or renewable natural gas conversation that we just had, we've also got to find ways to make the homes in the city of Philadelphia more sustainable. Because if you make the homes more sustainable, you're using less energy, and it makes it more feasible for some of these other ideas that we're talking about. However, to do that, that's a real challenge in the city of Philadelphia, which is a very seasoned city. Not everyone has the resources to make their home, very sustainable. I was just with Emily Shapira and the Philadelphia Energy Authority this morning at a press conference where they were installing solar panel on a homeowner's home in Belmont, but they had to make the home sustainable first to stop the leakage of energy out of the home. Do that first and then do the solar installation. And when I think about that, it makes me think about that Philadelphia Gas Works has a parts and labor program where we're using our PGW workforce, going to homes to make sure that people have great energy appliances and that they are safe. But considering we have that service, to me, that also provides an opportunity that we can maybe expand parts and labor to get into areas like weatherization and other services to make people's homes more sustainable. And it also could provide an opportunity from a workforce perspective, considering we have such a high rate of poverty, and we need to provide more jobs and opportunities for people in the city of Philadelphia. And there's also some training perspectives that can help people coming out of a neighborhood school or any school in the city of Philadelphia to train people to go into that space to grow that workforce. So I say all that to say, one, to get some perspective on that. PGW currently has a gas line training program where if you go through Community College of Philadelphia, you can get a certification so you can be a gas line operator and get a sustainable job and career if that's something you're interested in. So I wanted to get some perspective on how we address the weatherization aspect. If there's ways we can do that using PGW, as I talked about through parts and labor, how to expand that and really use this transition and issue on climate change as a way to address workforce and poverty in our city and still make our homes in our city more sustainable. That makes some of the other energy concepts that we talked about more viable. That's for any of the panelists.
Sure, I'll be happy to chime in on that. And I think Seth noted in his testimony that we do have one of the highest energy burdens in the country. There's some good data that we've been able to access regarding that. And so I think that's a real problem. It's, this issue that's kind of at the nexus of housing, climate, equity, affordability. So it's something that our office has been actually investigating over the last year and change. We held a series of community conversations with 6 communities that were identified as having some of the highest energy burdens in the city, to kind of really hear from people who are experiencing it and what sort of solutions and ideas they would have for the city to better address that issue. And I think one of the main things that we heard is that we heard a lot of findings, and I'd be happy to share, a larger presentation about those findings at another moment. But I think one thing we heard is that if you're just talking about weatherization of homes, it's hard to do that when the home has a lot of other needs. If there's, asbestos that needs to be remediated, if there's mold in the home, if there's a leaking pipe that's going to keep leaking, and even if you remediate the mold, if the pipe isn't addressed, it's going to create mold again, right? So you can't just invest in the weatherization of a home if you're not looking at the home more holistically. And that's not surprising news, right? The city ran a Energy Works home audit and energy efficiency program in the last administration using ERA funding, and it fell short, I think, of some of its goals, in part because of that. It only provided one sort of key service and wasn't really connected into other services that those same homes also needed. So we've been, partnering with the Energy Authority on the Built to Last pilot model, which we think will help us to unpack how do we do better, more comprehensive home interventions that can make homes healthier, cheaper to run, to pay for energy bills, more resilient against heat and the changing climate. I mean, these are, this is really the groundwork. And with 600,000 single family homes, it's going to be a heavy lift, but I think that is really going to be one of the priorities for our office, both from, that overlaps both with the gas work, sort of transition work and diversification work, as well as lots of other programs that we're concurrently running. So happy to continue the conversation on that front.
Well, the only thing I'll add to that, Councilman, so I mentioned we've spent $75 million in the last 10 years weatherizing homes, and you're spot on that's helpful and a really crucial component. Obviously, we're very proud of parts and labor, and having our trained technicians go out and address issues in home also improves the efficiency of their appliances, and so that's helpful as well. Christine brings up an interesting point about some of the challenges of weatherization. There's a small other component of our weatherization program where if our folks find health and safety issues, they have a small budget to address it. So we've actually, over the last 3 years, spent $250,000 addressing those health and safety issues that we see in people's homes. So it's a great program. It's largely voluntary, meaning that PGW doesn't have to do it to the extent we do it. But we, as we've talked about, think it's the right thing to do. I think your ideas of trying to sort of leverage the combination of parts and labor and weatherization is an interesting one, and it's something I just note of, and we'll look at that further.
Thank you all. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Bass for a question.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions that I had. And Christine, number one, I wanted to thank you for acknowledging that that we need state and federal assistance. When you put up the graph, or I think it was maybe Nikki put up the graph and was going through it, and I saw the big gap in terms of what we were doing now and where we needed to, how we were going to get to carbon neutral by 2050. And, that green area was really troubling. And so I'm glad to hear that there's a recognition that we do need our state and federal partners, and we need a significant amount of assistance to be able to get there. My question, I actually have one question for Christine and one for Seth. Christine, if you could give me some sense of the, because the numbers tell the tale of how are we getting to the end result that we're looking for in terms of making homes weatherized or just, ready, giving them the interventions as you described it, so that they are leading towards our goal of being carbon neutral. And I guess what I'm saying is, how many units need to be addressed in the city of Philadelphia, and how far along are we? Are we tracking what's being done? I know the city's doing stuff, individual organizations are doing things, PGW is doing things. Are we tracking all of the things that are happening so we can have a good sense of how close, far away, whatever we may be from reaching our goal?
That's a great question. As you note, there's not a single sort of metric for that. There's so many different actors doing so many different programs, which is wonderful, but it is also part of the complication is that there's a lot of different programs for one homeowner or one renter to access, and so that makes it difficult for them. But I will say this, because of that energy burden data that we were able to access, as I mentioned, we've been sort of deepening our work in that regard. We are starting to try to pull those numbers together from those different programs to see how they add up. So just one top line number I'll share is that according to this this energy burden mapping that we have, about 118,000 homes are in severe energy burden, which means they're spending 118,000.
118,000. Because I thought you said 18,000. I was like, is that it?
No, okay. No, yeah, 118,000 are in severe energy burden. I don't remember the number below that was sort of the next level of like very energy burden, but it was somewhere in the same ballpark of 6 figures, 100,000 plus. So what we're trying to do is track, according to those levels of energy burden, what are the programs that exist for them and how many are they servicing each year? So for example, we just partnered with the Energy Coordinating Agency to apply to a federal weatherization assistance program innovation and enhancement grant. It was a mouthful, with the idea of looking at the neighborhood energy centers that the Energy Coordinating Agency services. They run those. There's 17 neighborhood energy centers in different neighborhoods of the city. How many people are getting services through those NECs? How many programs are they getting registered for, et cetera? So we're actually basically embarking on trying to answer the question that you just asked, and I'd be happy to share what we've compiled so far, but we still, I think, have more digging and compiling to do.
Well, that would be great, if you could provide that to the chairman, and, I'm sure he'll get it to the members of the committee. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely.
So that we can have some sort of a sense of, how far off we are. And, as the budget season, quickly approaches, that may be something that we want to talk about, because it really, like your priorities are shown in your budget. And so if we're not budgeting for it, preparing for it, we're not really serious about it. So, so that's the first thing. My second question is, for you, Seth. And I know, just loosely following, this issue, in terms of some of the things that are happening on the state side. I know that previously you've addressed questions around, Senate Bill 275 and PGW's membership in industry associations. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that or elaborate on that issue just a little bit. Yeah, if you could just, touch on that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm particularly excited to answer your questions because as a Northwest resident, you represent me. So thank you. So we've talked about 275 a great deal, and so let me address it in sort of the context I did with my comments in terms of sort of facts and repercussions, right? So facts. As a Philadelphia resident, born and raised here, I'm never in favor of the seat telling you guys how you can and can't legislate, right? So that's why we're neutral on the bill, right? That's too blunt a tool to do anything. But we are extremely concerned about the catastrophic impact that limiting energy choices would have on our customers' wallet and the huge economic burden it would place on the finances of the city of Philadelphia. We already serve a cost-burdened population. Shifting natural gas consumption upstream to sell as higher cost electricity isn't helpful. Now, we are subject matter experts. When legislation comes up, our stakeholders, you and your fellow city council members and state legislatures and federal legislators, call us and ask opinions. It is our responsibility to answer. That's our job. That's not lobbying. Imagine for a moment you called me to say, hey, I have questions about a bill. And my response to you was, Councilman Bass, I might not be in support of that, so I'm not going to answer your question. Our job is to answer questions, but that's not lobbying. So you also asked about our membership in industry associations, right? We're a member of a couple industry associations. American Gas Association is the biggest one. That's a national trade organization comprising 200 members. On the more local level, we're part of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, which is just Pennsylvania utilities. The value we receive from these organizations is exponential compared to what we spend. Again, I'll give you facts. We spend $445,000 a year, I think, on the American Gas Association. They provide a whole variety of services and best practices. We have, I think, 75 different employees who participate in 34 different committees with their peers around the country. These are committees including safety, energy codes, sustainability, accounting, customer service, cybersecurity, human resources, internal audit, gas control, materials, OSHA, and I could go on, right? They teach us best practices about pipeline safety, about methane reduction. During COVID, they were an invaluable resource with health facts and advice on how to protect our folks, right? So the AGA has to IRS what percentage of their activities funds lobbying. Their percentage is 3.8%, right? 3.8%. So what we get out of AGA is not lobbying. What we get out of AGA is best practices. By the way, the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, I think, just reported a couple weeks ago their number for what percentage of their efforts are lobbying as opposed to anything. Their percent is 1.47%. And by the way, when it says lobbying is not lobbying, AGA is lobbying for pipeline safety. AGA is lobbying for LIHEAP. AGA led the effort nationwide, get $4.5 billion in supplemental LIHEAP funding into the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. All told, they got $8.25 billion in LIHEAP in 2021. It's the highest level in history. They lobby for infrastructure money for methane reduction and alternate fuels, right? So this whole idea that when people say we shouldn't be part of these organizations accrue benefits to PGW, to the city, and to our payers that are so exponential compared to what we spend that it's quite frankly comic to think that we would be better served not being members. So thank you for the opportunity to address that.
Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bass. I will now hear from Councilmember Gim and then Councilmember Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you especially to my colleague, Councilmember Bass. I appreciate your line of inquiry. I wanted to follow up with Nikki a little bit on the diversification study. And one, I just also want to say thank you to Christine Knapp, to your team and everybody. I know that the city has been explicit about its commitments and the need to move boldly. And these are difficult times, there's no question. We are going to have to imagine a future that does not currently exist while protecting our customers, protecting our city's standing, ensuring employment and a strong labor force. They all matter to us. But it's important to think about that part of this conversation is not about today and the metrics of today. Part of our conversation is about the metrics of a decade from now or 20 years from now, long past people's tenures in different agencies, long past all of us being in office. And we must still stay the course, right? So I am interested just in hearing from you a little bit about the diversification study from Nikki, I guess, whether there are potential cost savings, whether the study looked at potential cost savings or other potential value adds in exploring the alternatives in terms of the ability to potentially decommission portions of an aging network and infrastructure. Is that something you took a look at? And do you, if you didn't, is it something that you think would be beneficial to examine in future studies?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. Our focus of the study was really diversification options for PGW, so how PGW could thrive in a lower carbon future. As part of that scope, we did not look at potential cost savings for PGW, but we did look at like additional business models and business revenues that are complementary to the work that PGW is doing today. And we found that we looked at a broad variety of options from, for instance, the network geothermal systems that I mentioned, expanding the weatherization services, but we also looked at options such as PGW providing strategic electrification services to its customers, which would be a bit further away from the current business model. Each of those options has the opportunity to provide value specifically to either PGW's customers, to the workforce, or just to the city as a whole in achieving its carbon neutrality goals. We also found that none of these options really have the potential to fully support or to fully recover or cover the cost of the utility on the long term. So while like providing a combination or a mix of these options is valuable, cost recovery is still a challenge on the long term.
Yeah, there's no question that we're conscious about that. Can you talk a little bit, I mean, we've made multiple statements, right, about the financial viability of the natural gas model. We've talked about declining customer base, as alternatives become more affordable and, more accessible. Can you speak to the financial risks facing PGW if, they don't diversify quickly enough or significantly enough and embrace renewable options from the revenue standpoints?
If I could actually jump in first here, Nikki, and then have you answer as well. I just wanted to speak a finer point to the point that you're bringing up, council member, because I'm not sure we've stated it earlier, but it was actually one of the concerns that we had and why we wanted to tackle this study, which is the gas system costs what it costs, right? Any utility, it takes what it takes to manage that infrastructure and do what it needs to do. I worked at the water department, I sort of understand that bottom line. But when people leave the system, it still costs what it costs. And so a part of our concern was that if people who can afford to electrify their homes start leaving the system, those who cannot afford to would be left paying the cost of maintaining that system, whether it's 1 million people or 100,000 people, right? And so I do think that's an inherent concern that we had And, as we noted in my upfront comments, we have seen decline with PGW, and they've noted it themselves as well from appliance efficiency from warming weather. And so that was a key concern that we had. And then if you were to add in any carbon tax, any larger sort of federal or state intervention, from a regulatory standpoint, what would that then further do, right? So that was very much part of our impetus behind this, and I just wanted to give that a little extra flavor. So thank you and Nikki, I don't know if you wanted to add anything further on that.
I think that's exactly right, and it's important to note that the cost of this system are costs and investments that have been made over the past decades, right? So decades of investments in reliable infrastructure, and especially with programs to prevent methane leakages. The costs of the system are there, and they're embedded. And to answer your question on potential risk, what we're seeing, and that's what Mr. Shapiro said before, currently under the framework, the costs the PGW has to maintain are shared over the customers. So you can imagine with if customers choose to electrify, for instance, that customers would leave that gas system customer base. And as that happens, as fewer customers remain on the system, there's sort of a risk that those rates or the cost that PGW needs to recover are shared over those fewer customers, which potentially raises the cost for customers. And that, we think, is especially a risk for low-income customers, as they may not have the means to adopt an electric heat pump, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, this is one of the reasons why we want to be talking now. We're not talking about something that happens overnight, clearly, but we need to be talking about a future forward conversation about financial viability as well as climate. This is not just, we are also, as stewards and as managers of this public utility, which we held on to, for a significant political reason, to take care of our customers, but we also are deeply invested in the financial viability, and thus diversification is not a threat to the financial viability. Diversification may be, in fact, the underpinning of viability here, and I think that that's one of the things I wanted to highlight, and hope that we can continue to have more the understanding about the failure to move quickly enough could put us in a bad financial state. Again, maybe not in the next 2 or 3 financial cycles, but, we're looking at 10 to 20 years. Increasingly we are taking a look at population health benefits and, climate issues. Has the study, was the study able to consider the potential population health impact, and particularly the benefits of shifting from natural gas towards alternative sources? And could you speak to the costs of a city that, is, as we have noted, one of the most polluted cities in the country, particularly on air pollution standards, and how they end up being borne by the city?
Yeah, I can briefly follow up on that. So one of our evaluation criteria that were developed by the working group and stakeholders was air quality. So we looked at potential impacts on air quality, but it's important to note that we did that from a qualitative perspective. So we did not look at a quantification of what those health benefits could be to the city. We linked air quality to the combustion of fuels. And as you saw in that chart that I pulled up earlier with the check boxes, we see that especially moving towards electrification potentially improves air quality, whereas continuing to rely on, for instance, decarbonized gases does not. But we do not have a quantification of those impacts.
Well, we look forward to working with you a little bit more, and I hope certainly that health becomes part of the conversation around climate. This isn't an abstract issue, but one that directly impacts our residents' lives. Before I move to Mr. Shapiro, I just wanted to say a little bit of some thoughts. There's no question that we have to work on a multiple goals kinds of strategy. We do have both the urgency of time, which will not stop in any way, shape, or form, but the need. We do have some amount of time to be able to move through things. And one of the most important things is to be able to balance these multiple goals and responsibilities. First and foremost, ensuring and protecting our residents' health, ensuring that all Philadelphians have the energy they need for a dignified life at an affordable rate, protecting jobs, especially union jobs, and ensuring that workers aren't left behind, and eliminating the use of fossil fuels by 2050 at a minimum, and noting that we don't actually have that plan. We have a chart towards it, but as my colleagues have noted, with a significant gap, and you've noted as well, that we can't actually get to 2050 by ourselves. And so this is a serious concern for us. So either we're going to need to accelerate on our end, because if we are to have a plan by 2050, it is my personal opinion that we have to be in charge of that plan, right? Like we can't cede so many significant parts of the plan to other entities. So we need to think about what that means for ourselves. I also want to, just open up a little bit about being careful of false choices, that only some of these goals can be achieved, that some things are direct threats to others. At the pace that we're on and with the urgency in which this needs to happen, we do actually have to reject those false choices and need to be on a dialogue and playing field where we can talk about protecting residents' health and ensuring that Philadelphians have the energy they need. And we're going to have a conversation about protecting and creating union jobs while we move towards, a world in which the city is not reliant on fossil fuels in the next over the next several decades. So the task is, is to figure out how we can accomplish these objectives in a manageable way, recognizing that some may accelerate at different points than others. Not all of them have to move as quickly at the same time, but they all have to move, and we all have to be committed to all of them, so that both our residents aren't harmed, our customers aren't harmed, our city is not harmed, and that we maintain a strong labor force in the process. This is clearly a complicated issue, but it does not mean that we stall out or that we have to slow down things. I just think we have to be even more aggressive in exploring, pursuing alternatives. And so I would encourage the city's sustainability group to not continue with feasibility studies, but to start exercising on smaller scale pilots as we continue to do feasibility studies that allow us to take a look at larger scale pilots. So that would be one just comment and point of feedback. For Mr. Shapiro, I did want to ask a couple of follow-up questions to my colleague, Councilmember Bass, and I want to thank her for laying out some of the questions. But I do want to be a little bit more clear about what I understand PGW's work to actually be around SB 275. And to be clear, the City of Philadelphia, you are our municipal entity. We resisted the need to sell off PGW, to privatize it, because the city and our municipal utilities should be on a joint path together. And I feel very strongly that that I would have fought, had I been on city council, I wasn't at the time, but I would have fought the privatization of PGW, in part because we want to be able to jointly control our own future, to plan together, and to look out for the best interests of our residents, while bringing in expertise from the energy world about what our cities can do. The city is on record as opposing SB 275. We believe that preemption is a hazard. It limits our ability to consider it. And SB 275, to be clear, is a preemption bill. It would block municipalities from limiting fossil fuel use and promoting electrification. And I guess I have an issue with you saying that you've taken a neutral stand on the bill, when in fact it seems to indicate that right to know lawsuits have indicated that you took a direct role in crafting the legislation, strengthening the legislation. And then, my concern is that with your stating that you are now neutral on the legislation that you helped craft and strengthen that works against the city of Philadelphia's own interests, how are you reconciling that? Because I actually think that in order to do this appropriately, PGW can't be neutral. You have to step away.
I'm sorry, did you say we have to step away?
I think you have to say that a preemption bill from a city-owned municipality, public utility, is antithetical to PGW's mission and to the city of Philadelphia's best interests. That would keep us consistent on our positions. Not neutral, you had a role to play in the legislation. This was prior, even though you were on the board, as the executive, as now the executive director, and it is antithetical to the city of Philadelphia. It harms us. It promotes preemption, which is harmful to our city's ability to control our own future. And it is implicitly counter to the testimony issued by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability.
I just have a point of information, Mr. Shapiro, I just have a point of information, considering that I was the sponsor of that resolution opposing that work. Councilman McGimmon, earlier, I just want to make sure I have the full context of the question. Earlier, you also said, as a preamble to this question, that you would have supported the privatization of PGW. Make sure
I would not have.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay.
Very important for you to say.
Right.
I would not have supported the privatization of PGW, specifically because in situations like this. I want the city of Philadelphia and its publicly owned utility to be on the same page. There was a purposeful decision not to privatize PGW. And I believe, again, for the record, Mr. Chair, that was the right decision. Because in difficult circumstances, we must hold the same line in order for us to meet our common goals in the best interests of our customers, of our city, of our workers, and of our residents. And so that is why I'm asking this question to you. That it's not enough to say that it's okay for you to be neutral on legislation when you had such a strong hand, apparently, in crafting it and maybe even making it stronger. I think it's important with new leadership at PGW that you take a stand against SB 275 and keep our public utility in line with the mission, the goals, and the stand of the city of Philadelphia.
So thank you. I appreciate the question. And let me say, as an at-large, you represent me too, so thank you.
Yes.
If you'll indulge me, you said two things before you asked the SB 275 question that I don't want to let pass, because you made two really critical points that I want to emphasize and provide a little color on one. So the second point you made was about your position of sale, and I'm not here to opine as to whether PGW should have been sold or not, but to one of the points I made during my testimony, I couldn't agree with you more that as a city that wants to make a difference with respect to climate change, we are the largest municipally owned utility in the country. And if we actually want to make a difference, I can think of no better place to be than as the owner of that utility. So I echo what you said. I think it puts us in a really position to be accountable to our citizens rather than shareholders, and that's a nice position to be in. The second thing you said, which you said earlier, was talking about the financial implications of conservation, and there's a nuance that I think is important for you folks to recognize, and for everyone to recognize. I don't mean council, I mean the public, about what goes on in terms of this conversation at PGW. So this diversification study, which we were thrilled to participate in, asks a very specific question. And that question is, how can the city get to carbon neutrality by 2050? And what role can PW play and what are the impacts? That's a very important question to ask. But there's another equally important question to ask, and it gets to your point. And it's the question we ask internally every day. What should PGW do to prepare for the moment? Natural gas revenues itself aren't enough to sustain the company and our workforce. But our diversification in response to that question isn't limited to things around climate, right? We have to look at this asset of which we are the stewards for the city and say, what are the skills, what are the things we have, right? What are the things that our workforce is good at? Our workforce is good at customer service and billing and infrastructure. And as Councilman Green talked about, parts and labor. We own this incredible infrastructure designed for the transportation of molecules. And what does that mean? And what else can that transportation network and infrastructure and rights of way be used for. We own this incredibly valuable LNG facility, right? And we've given the ratepayers $4 billion with this LNG facility, and we continue to produce revenue through the LNG facility. So I love the lens you put on it, which is we need to make sure that if we are to slow act, that could have more catastrophic financial repercussions than being quick to act. So I think you put it very well, and I just had to thank.
Well, to be clear, I was not talking about slowing things down. I was actually talking about an urgency of action, but there are different pieces.
Talking about how not acting could be equally catastrophic, right? I'm with you. So let me talk about 265. First of all, it is not my job, and it is not my coworker's job to be for or against legislating necessarily. Like, I hear you say I should have come out against it or should have come out against it. I wasn't in the CEO.
Did PGW have an active role in the crafting of SB 275?
So I would have said your language of saying we had a strong role. I mean, you've seen the emails. I've seen the emails, right? In email over email, our Vice President of Government Affairs says PGW neutral. There are a couple emails, right? And understand, this was a rightful request, which was voluminous. I mean, pages upon pages on pages, right? None of which had anything to do with us opining on this, most of which were all of the investor-owned utilities commenting on the thing. And everyone's pointing to a single or two emails from one of our employees saying, hey, when you're describing energy, why don't you describe it in these ways, right? I mean, and it's what I said to Councilman Bass. Councilman, if you call me and ask me about a bill, what would your reaction be if I said, I don't know if I agree with the bill, so I'm not willing to answer your questions? If you say, what language would encompass this sorts of things, right? It's our job to know how the various bills impact us. So I understand your frustration. I understand others' frustration. I get, let me just finish what I was saying. I get that preemption is not a thing we're in favor of for the city. And I've said that multiple times, and I've said it in multiple venues, right? That's the issue. Okay, we are not in favor of preemption. If you want me to issue a public statement that says, I, Seth Shapiro, am in favor of anyone preempting the rights of Philadelphia to govern, I'll sign.
No, I'm not asking
right?
you for a general statement about preemption.
But
I
mean, again, I've read these emails, and it's not lobbying. I don't see it. I don't see us. I'm in communication with the Gas Commission and with the mayor's office. We can push for 275.
Okay. So my understanding is PGW provided line edits to the bill. Line edits around a definition in the bill prohibiting Philadelphia from enacting legislation. So definitions do matter. The feedback matters. And claiming neutrality is, or lobbying, not having to lobby for a bill that you provided line edits for, is a problem. It allows you for a.
We did not provide line edits. We suggested, and by the way, not to, and understand, just to everyone else who's listening who may not know the detail that you know, our employees were in communication with legislative staff or with legislators, right? They were in a dialogue with dozens of other energy industries, and these are dialogues that cover a whole host of topics. And so to say that one of his peers asked him what he thinks a definition of energy should be, and for him to comment, I just think it's a stretch to call it lobbying. I'm sorry, I just do.
Well, I don't think it's, I think it says what it says. So you suggested language for a bill that was specifically about preemption, though.
So I did not. Let's just be very clear. I was not in the myth. There was an employee who responded, I believe, and again, I have to go pull these from a long time ago, who provided a suggestion, a definition of a single term to a colleague who was not a legislator or legislative staff. I believe that's the emails that are creating all the kerfuffle.
And do you believe that if this were to circle back around again, like if a senator from outside of Philadelphia were to reach out to you to request suggested language to a bill, would PGW continue to comply with that?
So let me be clear. As I talked before, we have a number of regulators, and we answer to a number of levels of government. I am a public servant, okay? If you call me and ask me an opinion, I'm going to try and be a subject matter expert for you. And yes, if a senator from some other parts of the state calls me and asks me a question for which I am a subject matter expert, I believe I am obligated to give them a response. Right? You could be introducing legislation I don't agree with, and I welcome you if you're introducing legislation that I personally don't agree with, or even legislation that I think is harmful for PGW. I will still respond to you, and I will still give you the best of my subject expertise to help you do your job. That's my responsibility.
So PGW is a member of the American Gas Association.
Councilmember Gim, I do know that E3 has a time window, and I know Councilmember Gilmore Richardson and also Councilmember Jones. I know Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, who's also part of this conversation, wanted to make some remarks. So I just wanted to be cognizant of
this is my last question.
They were the drafter of the study.
Yep, this is my last question. So PGW is a member of the American Gas Association, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and how much do you pay per year to be a member of that gas association?
So again, I'm just off the top of my head, but I believe the number I just gave was, I think it's $445,000 a year.
Okay, and was any of the work that you provide, around SB 275 part of what you would have done as through the American Gas Association, or is there any relationship between that and the work around SB 275?
I'm not aware of any conversations that happened between any PW employees and AGA staff about 275. I'm not aware of all that AGA played in it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Again, I just want to emphasize that the reason why PGW is a municipal utility and why so many people fought to hold on to it is because we should be in alignment. SB 275, PGW's past work in responding to SB 275 is antithetical to the City of Philadelphia's mission. I consider it a problem. I believe policies need to change at PGW on that particular issue. And I do think that while I recognize that you've said that there are certain amounts of benefits from the American Gas Association, they and their work also works to undermine many of the goals that Philadelphia has. As a municipal utility, I believe that you should cut ties and that we should work together. And partly why we have Ms. Lindmeyer on here is because we are invested. We are deeply invested in individuals who conduct these studies, and we would like to see $445,000, honestly, from PGW go into subject matter experts who can bring PGW the kind of vision that it needs to have to be a thriving, strong public municipality. And those are all my comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you both.
Councilman, may I just respond to one point that the Councilmember Gim brought up around feasibility studies?
Yes.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say, Councilmember, I hear your idea of, let's not study, authorizing, let's act. I think particularly when it comes for the network geothermal, and Seth, you chime in here. I think this came out of a conversation that you and I had about next steps for pilots is if we wanted to say, let's pilot network geothermal, where would it go? Where geologically can Philadelphia have geothermal, bored down in? What is the workforce that would be needed to install it and maintain it? And how would PGW finance it? So those are like, it's a feasibility study, but they're kind of the critical building blocks of being able to actually implement a pilot. So those are the key things that we would want to explore, not to study it to death, but to really figure out how do you get it done in a very logistical way.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp, and I agree with you. We need a roadmap to get these things done. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, you have a very brief comment. I know Councilmember Jones has been waiting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my district colleague, Councilmember Jones, for this latitude. But I just wanted to be recorded as present for this hearing, Mr. Chair. I am not a member of either of the committees, but as the chair of City Council's Committee on the Environment, I wanted to tune in to this hearing and really have the opportunity to hear more about the diversification study, which has been all the talk and all of the conversations that we've had with the environmental group. So thank you very much, Christine Knapp, and to your team and everyone who has done really a lot of work on this issue. I also just wanted to mention that I'm looking forward to how we think about together as a city our goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And we will be proceeding with the hearings on building decarbonization in the spring to further think about our next steps. And lastly, for the record, I just wanted to know if there was a timeline for next steps, now that the study has been released on all the next step efforts that have been mentioned. But I'll be here listening, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm very happy to see the level of interest, not only from some of our environmental groups, but from everyone who now has a keen interest in this issue. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the parties involved.
Thank you. And we will have a second hearing on this issue where we can focus on some of those next steps. Councilmember Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Chair of Environmental for the committee for City Council and her laser focus on this issue, and I appreciate it. And I represent the 4th District, and whenever one of those 100-year storms happens, it happens on Main Street, where we have to dig out businesses, deal with the flooding, evacuate apartment buildings, and it's supposed to happen every 100 years. It looks like it's happening every other year. So this is a real thing for us. So carbon neutrality at a particular point is important. But I want to note for the record that I think it was 2014 when the issue was hot and heavy about the sale of PGW. This council stopped it. This council, in spite of the recommendations of the editorial boards at the time, the belief was that the gasworks was in such financial crisis, on the verge of collapse, on the verge of financial defalcation, and it was going to take the city's bond rating down. I remember being in the hearings with all of that, and I am glad and thankful to this management group that we're still here. We're still viable, and we're still providing services, Mr. Chairman, to the customers in the city of Philadelphia. Having said that, a couple of questions. And I'm glad that we're now able to not be worried about putting out the fire, but looking towards the future of this institution. Could you recap for me, is there dollars to be anticipated towards this effort from the Biden infrastructure bill?
I can take a stab at that, if that's all right, council member. So we're going through the infrastructure bill, obviously with a fine-tooth comb. It depends on what you're looking to do. So there are weatherization dollars. The WAP program is getting a big infusion of cash through infrastructure, so that's great.
So can you be specific? How much cash, and what's that impact going to be on reducing carbon footprints?
So I don't have an exact number of what the WAP amount that would go to Pennsylvania, and then from Pennsylvania they distribute it to Energy Coordinating Agency, which is our local WAP administrator. I don't know that we have a number yet. I think we know how much may be coming to Pennsylvania, but we don't know yet how Pennsylvania will allocate that by county. But I can check in with the ECA and see.
And when you do, can you provide that to the chair, who will get it to members of council?
Sure, and the answer may just be that we don't know yet, because there's still a lot about this legislation that is still coming down. And then there's also amounts that are designated to formula, which the WAP dollars are formula. Then there's competitive grants that we can seek out. So really going through both of them to understand what formula dollars may be flowing here and what competitive grants we may want to actively pursue. So the answer is there's definitely money in there for lots of things that could help support next steps on this front. It does kind of depend on which of the pilot recommendations or the other recommendations that are there or other activities that Seth and his team may want to pursue in some of their other sort of sustainability and methane reduction goals, for things like pipe replacements or fixing methane leaks. So the short answer is yes. The more difficult answer will be kind of getting those details and seeing what can go towards which goal.
So I remember also back then, all of the companies were circling the carcass of PGW looking to pick its bones. And one of the bright spots was liquefied gas and I must be getting old because I remember when natural gas was considered the clean industry and dirty old coal was the bad guy, and somehow that has changed. And I agree, we need to look to the future, but however, nevertheless, as we look at international, what Israel has done with its offshore holdings and what Putin is doing with the pipeline coming through to go to Germany. They're looking at this in a futuristic vein, and help me to understand how freezing liquefaction of gas as an export, how is that going to be dealt with in the future?
I can only answer the first part of your question, which is that natural gas has been looked at as one method of decarbonization in that it is generally less carbon intensive than coal. But that is an accounting that may not take into the full life cycle of the fracking and transportation and leakage of natural gas. And what we do know is it is still a fossil fuel. And so as I think Nikki pointed out in the testimony, the use of natural gas in Philadelphia accounts for about 24% of our carbon footprint. So it'd be better than that from that. If likely it's better that that's coming from that than from coal, or it would be much higher. But it is still a significant portion of our carbon footprint. I couldn't answer your question about LNG. It's outside of my area of expertise. I'm sorry.
Just one other thing. Isn't gas used in the creation of electric energy today?
Yes, sometimes.
What percentage? How does it? Give me the mechanics of that.
I think Seth actually already spoke to that in his testimony. Perhaps he wants to revisit those facts.
Would you indulge me, Seth, and repeat that then?
Yeah, of course. So the grid in Pennsylvania is about 40% natural gas, 5% renewables, 20% coal, 20% nuclear, roughly. And if you mind, I'll answer some of your LNG questions. You want me to address some of that?
Please.
Yeah. So and let me for those listening, either your colleagues or the public who aren't aware, right? So one of the things that makes gas and the transfer of energy through molecules valuable is that the difficulty of energy is storing and transporting it. And one of the tools that makes natural gas one of the best things in which to store energy and transport it is the ability to liquefy it. When you liquefy natural gas, you cool it negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit. It makes it 600 times more dense, right? So we have an LNG facility where we both do that cooling process to create liquid out of the gas, and we can store up to 4 BCF, 4 billion cubic feet of it. Now, we use that for two really, really important things. The first thing we use it for hedging, right? Unlike some of our investor-owned brethren, we can't buy financial hedges on the price of natural gas. We can physically hedge it, right? We can put it into the tank so that we have it, so that when things spike, right, like whether what happened in Texas happens, or even there was a spike last week where in parts of New England, and just in context, let's say right now we're paying about $4 for gas. There's a spike last week in New England where gas was $15, right? We have the ability to vaporize that stored liquid. So that helps, and we estimate we've saved over the life of those tanks $4 billion, dollars for our customers. The other thing it allows us to do is provide for our peak day, right? So as any gas utility, the regulations that both come from the Public Utility Commission and from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, require us to have a gas slot for the sort of peak design day that you think you're going to get. And to put a little flavor to that, our peak design day is right around 700 MCF, million cubic feet, okay? We have the capacity on pipelines to bring 300 MCF a day. We have the ability to bring from the storage we have out along those pipelines another 120. The rest, the other 280 that we would need if there's a cold day so that we don't have to turn off gas to customers, we get by vaporizing, turning back into gas that was stored there. So it is this monumental thing that we have this supply. It puts us in a better situation than many of our peers. And in fact, it's why that despite all the hurdles of municipal ownership, we still tend to have one of the lowest prices of the commodity of gas of all the utilities in Pennsylvania. So the LNG is a huge attribute. It also has great values. We also have the ability to vaporize gas and then sell those reservations in the pipeline that I talk about and turn that into dollars. And that gets into the diversification strategy. We can use that asset, I think, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I want to say we made $10 to $12 million on behalf of our ratepayers over the last year by selling the assets that having that LNG allows us to do.
So one other technical question, and I don't pretend to be an engineer, but so our molecules come from Texas and through fracking. Do you know what percentage of which we utilize?
So it varies greatly, right? And one of the weird things is the way natural gas pipelines work, right? There's gas filling up pipe. The pipes actually flow south till, I don't know, probably Virginia, North Carolina, and north from the Gulf, south of that. And it varies based upon time of the year. So I would tell you that we may buy molecules far south of us, so the cost we're paying is based there, but the actual molecules we get might actually come from Marcellus shale, right? So you're not always getting gas from where you buy it. That's just the nature of the commodity trade. I would tell you that in the summer and into the sort of shoulder seasons, the likelihood is almost all of the gas we have is coming from shale gas, like Dominion South or somewhere over there. In the winter, my guess is it's closer to a 50-50 split. If you wanted more specificity, I could ask someone. Unlike you and I at least pretend to be an engineer. There are people who actually are engineers. But I think those numbers are about right. That about half our supply, if we were to look today, is coming from shale, and half is probably coming up from the Gulf.
So there was discussion about commingling certain gases within a pipeline to make it more profitable, more efficient, and using less energy and reducing our carbon. What was the other chemical to condense the gas molecules and co-transport? Do you recall?
I don't. I know that there are conversations about where we would augment our gas, not only with RNG, but if you could insert hydrogen. There's
that's
still,
what I think it was.
So there's talk about that. The jury's still out on that. I think that if you were to poll the industry, they would tell you that much more than 5%, I'm sure of, right? Part of it is the molecules are of a different density. The molecules are of a different ignition profile. It would change our leak struct conceivably because the molecules are different. So we're still doing feasibility on what we could do for hydrogen. As we talk about different sort of pilots we are looking at pilots that might inject a small amount of hydrogen into our existing pipes. We're also looking at whether you could create a standalone hydrogen network, right? Like we love the idea of creating a geothermal microgrid and finding a place to do a pilot where you're not commingling geothermal, obviously, with natural gas, creating its own infrastructure. I think similarly, the right path for hydrogen is to create a standalone infrastructure around maybe a warehouse that uses hydrogen for its energy, or maybe we talk to other big infrastructure users about how to create a hydrogen microgrid. But it's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones, and thank you for steering us back to the point of this afternoon's conversation, which is the diversification study. Are there any other comments from members of council for this panel? Seeing none, and thank you all, and we do look to have a follow-up conversation on this issue in another hearing, and in that following conversation, some of the other potential partners, hopefully we can have them in that conversation, especially some of the other departments in the city and some of the other non-government entities that can help us in moving this conversation forward. I'll now ask the clerk to read the names of the next panel witnesses to testify regarding resolution number 210653.
Audrey Schulman, co-founder and co-executive director of the Home Energy Efficiency Team. Zainab McGavi, co-executive director of HEAT, and Ashita Ghana, who is an associate at RMI.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. We will have each one of those witnesses to testify in that order. I know it's been some time, you heard a lot of conversation, but knowing this panel, I expect you to bring the heat. I'm sure you've heard that joke several times, but I've enjoyed your presentation in the past. So please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you so much. I'm Audrey Schulman, co-executive director of HEAT. HEAT's a climate solutions nonprofit incubator that came up with the GeoGrid. The GeoGrid, as you can see here, is a networked ground source heat pump system that's referred to in the PGW report as networked geothermal. The system uses known and proven technology. There's similar installations and campuses across the country. Our innovation is to have the gas utilities install and operate it in the right-of-way of the street. Networked ground source heat pumps are the most efficient method of providing heating and cooling known. And let me just quickly acknowledge what Mr. Shapiro said with great respect. A new gas boiler can burn up to 97% efficiency. And that means it delivers less than 1 unit of heat to the home for each 1 unit of energy used. The GeoGrid, by moving heat, sort of the same way your fridge does, rather than making it through combustion, can move 6 to 8 units of energy per 1 unit of energy used. That's a lot better. Also, I believe page 29 of the E3 report refutes the statement about the impact of building electrification on greenhouse gas emissions. It will lower greenhouse gas emissions. So, and I just, as a second thing, I've got a new expensive gas boiler a while ago. And I did that because I thought it was the cleanest way to go forward. However, gas unburned is overwhelmingly methane, a potent greenhouse gas. New research shows that if more than 3% of it is leaked without being used, without being burned, anywhere from the wellhead to your stove, it's worse than coal. I don't want the city in its emissions reduction work to make the same expensive mistake I did. The PGW diversification study goals are to reduce emissions, benefit low-income customers, and provide long-term workforce opportunities. And the GeoGrid can meet all of these goals. Emissions. The GeoGrid runs on electricity. Since it's so efficient, it needs only a tiny amount of electricity. Happold Engineering calculated that in Massachusetts, for any building connected, the emissions would reduce 60% immediately in comparison to gas. As your electric grid moves to renewables, these emissions will decline further. Workforce opportunities. Because the GeoGrid uses the same type of pipes as gas, workers can transition easily with minimal training, keeping their good jobs for the lifetime of the infrastructure, which lasts about as long as the gas infrastructure. And with low-income customers, Philadelphia families spend twice as much of their income on energy as the national average. No one wants to increase that burden. But if we continue with the business as usual, this is exactly what's likely to happen. As Nikki explained before, as customers move off the system, they will raise gas heating bills for those who remain. In the end, the only ones left will be the low income, and the city might have to pay for stranded assets. Finally, adding decarbonized gases would only accelerate that vicious cycle by increasing customer energy bills. Thank you. Zainab.
Well, I have to manage to unmute and unshare and turn my camera on. There we go. Does that work out? Excellent. I'm Zainab Magavi, the other co-executive director of HEAT. And I just want to start by saying I so admire the complexity of the conversation you're having here today, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. Decarbonizing one of the oldest gas systems in the country efficiently and equitably is an enormous challenge. This challenge might also be a great opportunity to boldly build the energy system of the future. You have a lot of old pipes. 45% of your system is aging cast iron pipe that must be replaced from now until 2057. That is billions of dollars of new fossil fuel infrastructure. It will take half a century to pay off, during which there may be even more restrictive emissions mandates. Risky. Yet it is also risky to leave aging, leaky infrastructure in the ground indefinitely. The last thing we all want is a cracked main too close to a building or a leak filling up a manhole with gas. So you can address both these types of risk by redirecting that infrastructure spending to replace the old gas infrastructure with the geogrid instead, where possible. If you do this at the same pace as the cast iron is being replaced today, nearly half of your PGW system could be modern, non-emitting infrastructure by 2057. Growing a new, diversified, and future-proof business model that best meets your customer needs. Needs like low monthly energy bills. And yes, the geogrid does cost more to install, so it sounds confusing, but a Massachusetts economic analysis predicted lower customer energy bills. Why? Because the increased installation costs spread over decades were entirely offset by the greatly reduced fuel cost. Also, needs like better indoor air quality, to mention the public health impacts, more cooling, and no explosions. That's good too. The higher efficiency of the geogrid even helps us avoid the pitfall described by Seth Shapiro, where we grow electric demand much faster than we grow renewable electric supply and end up working at odds with our climate goals until the renewable supply catches up. Higher efficiency addresses that, and it also lowers the winter grid peak, essentially moving that seasonal storage of gas and LNG to the ground under your feet. I'll try to wrap up. As you mentioned, PGW started in 1836 and has moved from a lighting company to a heating one, from gasification to natural gas. This tells me it's an organization with a history of changing to meet the needs of the people it serves. So I hope PGW joins the handful of gas utilities that are already installing the geogrid, such as National Grid, Eversource, and Con Ed. And those utilities are investor-owned and see the geogrid as a promising business model, even with their obligation to generate profit for investors. They are gas utilities approved to rate base the cost of the installation, allowing the geogrid to be depreciated and socialized in a conventional gas utility way, creating one single merged geogas rate base or pool of customers, with the increasing geogrid customers protecting the remaining gas customers from rising costs. I do not believe the PGW analysis has socialized the infrastructure cost of the geogrid in this way, and I suggest it be considered in the proposed feasibility study. Doing so would allow PGW's forecast of income to increase with a gas geo customer base instead of decreasing from a declining gas customer base, allowing for decarbonization without rising cost, job loss, and increasing energy inequality. So 3 quick closing notes. We're attaching testimony submitted in a Massachusetts rate case where National Grid gas was approved in December to rate base 4 different installations of the geogrid. The testimony is from Steve Bryant, the ex-head of Columbia Gas, describing why he thinks this is a good business model for a gas utility, and from Carrie Smith of the Gray Edge Group, describing the engineering paradigms. We suggest, too, that you move more quickly. Identify potential sites where there is a distal branch of the leak-prone cast iron. Yes, the bedrock is the closest to the surface of the north side of Philly, which keeps drilling costs down, but you may just want to prioritize a site that represents your gas system best. And then a site feasibility review can select one for a first demonstration, and you can learn on the ground even as the proposed feasibility study maps out your scaling potential. Finally, we at HEAT are happy to connect you to experts of all kinds and to share the key learnings from our work in Massachusetts and other states. And I want to leave you with one. We urge you to clearly include from the beginning your utility workers in your first demonstration project. After all, they are the shoulders upon which success will depend. Thank you so much.
You're on mute.
Sorry.
You're still on mute. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Good
I
afternoon,
can hear you now.
Chair.
Just state your name for the record and please proceed with your testimony.
Okay. My name is Ashita Gona, and I'm an associate at RMI. Thank you, Zainab and Audrey, for that great presentation. And thank you to Chairs Green and Johnson and members of the committee for your time today. My name is Ashita Gona, like I said earlier, and a little bit of background about RMI. We're an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose mission it is to transform the global energy system to secure a clean, prosperous, and zero-carbon future for all. In 2019, a colleague of mine actually testified in front of this body on the need for proactive planning for PGW to equitably achieve Philadelphia's climate and economic goals. So the release of this business diversification study brings this conversation full circle, and today's hearing is a really important moment for Philadelphia. The study frames PGW's challenge and its opportunity. The challenge is that PGW will need to significantly evolve in the next decade to maintain its financial viability and workforce, but this challenge actually also presents a really great opportunity for the city to improve its aging housing stock, reduce carbon emissions, and improve local air quality and health. There's a few items we'd like this body to consider. First, while there are a range of options, the study presents a clear conclusion that decarbonized gas is not a solution to PGW's business model challenge or for buildings. The study itself finds that using decarbonized gases for more than 15% of required gas supply in buildings presents significant financial concerns. Sky-high commodity costs would leave PGW with an $840 million annual revenue gap, and even the most optimistic decarbonized gas scenario. By contrast, the study and similar studies in Maryland, New York, and New Jersey, which we'd be happy to share, have found that transitioning to clean electric heating is cost-effective and would substantially reduce gas use. Second, proactive planning and action from the city and PGW this decade can ensure an equitable and prosperous energy transition. Regulators should explore non-pipe alternatives to gas investments and to diversify PGW's business. This includes neighborhood-level electrification measures and network geothermal pilots that we've been talking about. The savings of doing so could be significant. PGW is slated to spend more than $600 million through 2027 replacing or building out its aging gas system. Low-hanging fruit to consider include requiring all-electric new construction, ensuring that oil or propane heating customers are prioritized for electrification first because that is the most cost-effective scenario in which to electrify, and slowing down gas infrastructure replacement programs while triaging leaks. Third, the city should prioritize solutions for low-income households. This includes electrification subsidies, embedding electrification into existing city programs, and reforming low-income electricity rate structures. Philadelphia has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure opportunities for its workers and the city's residents, but only through proactive and transparent planning. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Sorry for the brief interruption. I just have a quick question for the two representatives from HEAT. And I want to get some perspective on this concept. Assuming that we did not have the issues that we have with the PUC, like we had with renewable natural gas pilot that PGW attempted. If there was a company, let's say, that wanted to come to the city of Philadelphia and said we wanted to have some type of district geothermal in reference to provide energy to our business. And we did that at a location that we control, let's call it the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which is managed by our Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, PIDC. If PGW were to engage in that concept where PGW helped to develop that District Geothermal to provide energy for that company at the Navy Yard. My understanding on geothermal is that we would then have to basically drill down to the part of the earth which is going to draw up the energy or the heat up through and then transition that throughout the company. And that's a way that we could do that, and you would need labor working with 686, our labor union, to help in that installation. Is that somewhat similar to what happened with National Grid and Boston Gas with United Steelworkers? Because I want to get some perspective on that.
So I'll just start briefly with the word geothermal, which has caused so much headache because it means 4 different technologies, really. And if you drill very deep in the earth, we're talking mile, 2 miles, and get something hot water, hot steam, hot lava, you are doing something quite different than what we're proposing, which is just to go a couple 100 feet down with a very small borehole. We're talking 6 inches. It's far less disruptive and really not the same, and it moves temperature both in and out seasonally, rather than having a source of hot that you're going down to. So, Audrey, do you want to address the workforce?
Yeah, so at National Grid and at Eversource, they're going to be probably using a third party to do the design and install, because they don't have yet experience on their workforce to do that. I believe National Grid might not. We do not know yet whether they will actually have their workforce there to watch and learn about it. We encourage greatly to whoever does it to have their workforce there, observing, training, and participating, so that they can go forward in this new area.
And some of the skills that the existing gas workers have, and in our area, it's steel workers that are doing the repairs, for example, are the same skills that you would need for this system, like butt fusing HDPE pipe, for example. Same skill, already certified. So there's a lot of transferability that's ready to go. We understand why, for example, Eversource is bidding it out as a complete project for their first try. And we would love to see it be really clear from the beginning that the future work of this would be a continuation of the engagement with the current workers.
And we did sit down with the geothermal expert and the head of the local gas workers union here in Massachusetts, and there was very, very minimal differences in the work.
Okay. Well, thank you. You have another comment?
You're muted, Zainab.
I apologize. It appears the Navy Yard is actually on the river, yes. So you might not need to drill to do that one. You could probably use the temperature in the river.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective. I just want to kind of get an idea of what you were talking about and using kind of a real-life Philadelphia example of a land space that we kind of control, and the idea that, various companies do come to the Navy Yard because of the various benefits and tax breaks that will occur. And it, to me, seems that could provide that opportunity for that type of pilot using or looking at dollars through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act as a way to start that process where you include both labor, PGW, and a private entity that will be looking to come to Philadelphia, and that could be one of the ideas coming out of this diversification study that we could put into implementation based on the concept that you described and what is currently going on in Boston with National Grid. So thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, at this point, I'm going to thank you all for your presentation. It was good to see this information once again. And Mr. Iannuzzi, if you can call the next panel.
Jolene Price, Energy Unit Supervising Attorney at Community Legal Services. Bill DeCroce, CEO at Vicinity Energy. And Tammy Murphy is Advocacy Director of Pennsylvania Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi, for that. If we could have the first witness, Ms. Price, state your name for the record and then begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairperson Green. Good afternoon. My name is Jolene Price. I'm an attorney in the Energy Unit at Community Legal Services. CLS's Energy Unit advocates to ensure that Philadelphia households have access to affordable water, heat, and electricity in their homes. CLS's Energy Unit serves two important roles. We serve as public advocate, representing PGW's residential customers in matters before the Philadelphia Gas Commission. And we represent individual low-income utility customers in affording, restoring, and maintaining utility service, and groups of customers seeking improvements to programs and policies that benefit low-income utility customers. I'm glad to be here today to discuss the sustainability and diversification of PGW. I'd like to provide perspective on the diversification study that is informed by CLS's work with hundreds of individual PGW customers who are currently struggling to afford and maintain heating in their homes. As the study notes, Philadelphia households already face high energy burdens. Free home repair and weatherization programs are critical to reducing energy costs and keeping people healthy and safe. We urge the city and PGW to utilize all available resources to provide free home repair, weatherization, and energy efficiency to low and moderate income homeowners and tenants. But these programs must be free. The diversification study's proposal that PGW provide loans and financing to low-income customers for customer-side energy upgrades is, simply put, a bad idea. When we talk about Philadelphia households that are already struggling to get by, we cannot be adding more to their cost burden. It was disappointing to see that after the lengthy effort put into this study, the result included an ill-advised proposal to have PGW finance weatherization and energy efficiency with customer loans, rather than increasing assistance to customers. Studies have noted that these loans are inappropriate for PGW's residential customer base, showing that they quickly become unaffordable for the people they are supposed to be helping. Households enrolled in the Customer Responsibility Program, or CRP, PGW's low-income bill assistance program, are unlikely to benefit from any supposed cost savings. Because CRP rates are calculated based on income, not usage, these low-income customers would only incur higher monthly bills. Increasing monthly costs to low-income customers is not a viable option, short-term or otherwise, and the recommendation to pursue it should be rejected as a non-starter. PGW also already has a low-income usage reduction program, which provides free weatherization and usage reduction services to low-income customers. If we want to keep people safe in their home, the city must think creatively about sources of funding and methods to implement programs that address home habitability and efficiency. Rather than provide financing through loans, PGW could prioritize and invest in expanding its weatherization programs to promote efficiency and usage reduction, and explore ways to partner with the city to pair these usage reduction efforts with basic home repairs. Ultimately, people should get to live in safe and healthy homes regardless of how they heat their homes. Congress is making $3.5 billion available for weatherization assistance through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Pennsylvania stands to have hundreds of millions of dollars to make these investments at no cost to the recipients. PGW should not get into the business of building and then collecting on people's debt for home repairs when there are much better options available. Rather, the city should invest already available funding and identify new sources of funding to prioritize safe, efficient, durable homes for low-income Philadelphians. The City of Philadelphia and PGW must examine options to decarbonize with affordability of heating as a backdrop. As households with the ability to move away from gas do so, both PGW and the city need to commit to ensuring that those who are currently unable to afford their utility bills will have options to maintain heat in their homes. In a city like Philadelphia, where so many families already cannot afford to stay connected to PGW service, any proposals must be viewed with consideration to those who have the least capacity to pay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Mr. DeCroce, if you could just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Bill DeCroce, President and CEO of Vicinity Energy. First of all, I'd just like to thank Chairman Green and Chairman Johnson for inviting me to participate. It's much appreciated. We're a significant energy player in Center City and West Philly, certainly not in a broader geographical context, but we play an important part there. So our company owns and operates the largest portfolio of district energy networks in North America in 12 cities, about 19 separate districts. The largest of those is Philadelphia. And worthy of note, Philly's district energy system is the second largest on the continent, just right behind Manhattan. So Con Ed system is a bit bigger. That asset class, that unique and invaluable asset class is what I want to talk about. Because as many people have stated, there's no silver bullet in this battle to getting to net carbon zero, period. We've got to use every tool in the toolbox. So I'm here to talk about our tool and how it can work. And in some ways, we can work with PGW. In some ways, we can work independently. But bottom line is, Philly needs to use all the tools it has. And on that front, as far as decarbonization, given the fact that we operate in many different cities, we see many different policies. We see many different gas markets, electric markets. And what we try to do is learn from the best and then pass it along. So I'll talk a little bit about some stuff that's going on inside Philly and outside Philly, but what can apply to Philly in the future. So I'll start with present and then go to future. So today, we operate this large district in Philly. It's at its core, its heart, is the largest combined heat and power plant in the Commonwealth. So that's Grace Ferry sitting down at the old Pico station, which we now own in South Philly. That plant today, by established mechanisms, established science that's recognized by the federal EPA, Pennsylvania's DEP, under the methods of how you calculate using CHP to electrify and heat versus conventional means, avoids over 300,000 tons per year of carbon in Philly. So that means for everybody who's breathing the air in the greater Philly bubble, and as we know, that bubble doesn't draw lines at neighborhoods, it's everybody. Today, we're avoiding 300,000 tons of carbon otherwise using conventional means. And why is that? Just fundamentally, combined heat and power. Seth talked about power plants, right, that put electricity on the grid. The big difference on a CHP plant is at big power plants, you see a cooling tower. Well, that 100-year-old technology that uses steam turbines has to condense the steam coming out of the back end for the process to work, and it throws that energy away up a cooling tower or into a river or into the ocean. That's just the technology that's been around for a while for power generation. The difference with CHP is we don't throw it away. We put it in the pipes and we heat the city. So we're dramatically more efficient than conventional power plants. And in fact, we're the greenest way, the lowest carbon way to burn methane large scale. Okay, that's present. And we'll talk about the future, but that's today and the benefit of that. We distribute that through 30 miles of very robust underground piping that was frankly built and designed back in the day, but it's in fantastic shape, which we maintain. We provide 99.9% reliability with data that shows that. Reason being is because our biggest customers in Philly and frankly in most of our cities, if not all, is hospitals. So hospitals need our steam to sterilize. You have to have it. If they don't have our steam, they cancel surgeries. So we design our reliability at that very high end. Everybody else on the system gets the benefit of it. And as I mentioned, compared to conventional means, we're dramatically lower carbon footprint. We touch the hospitals, we touch municipal buildings, commercial space, hotels, art museums, sports venues, life science. And in Philly, that's 75 million square feet of heating. And in the summer, 25 million square feet of cooling. That's the equivalent of 50 Comcast towers. So a lot of people don't understand the touch we have on downtown, but that's the nature of what it is. Our company we view ourselves as an environmental company, and that may sound funny because you say, wait a minute, you've got power plants, you burn methane. But in fact, because of our footprint is so dramatically lower than conventional means, we're trying to grow it. And I'll get to the future where we're going to dramatically decarbonize going forward. But just using that cogen that we have in Philly, every new million square feet of buildings that we attach to our system, you get a 3,000 to 5,000 ton per year avoided carbon. That's real. And the other thing to consider, when you utilize our CHP system with those type of benefits, you're not adding more stacks to downtown. And ultimately, every time we put more combustion equipment into buildings, it's more stacks, and it's already a dense environment where lots of people, lots of cars, lots of emissions. The more stacks we add, the worse the air gets. So we really are contributing, and the further use of our system contributes to a cleaner air environment. And the reality of it is when a building owner or city or a university puts in those type of assets, they're going to be there for a while. And they're going to keep burning fossil fuels for a long time. So that's just something that we consider as we're looking forward. Another important part, our company's invested probably north of 300 million in greening of assets over the last decade. That's all private money. That's not that's not taxpayers' money. It's not citizens' money. It's shareholder money. In our case, we're owned by folks. We're basically funded by pension funds. So it's pretty low cost money, low cost of capital, and there's a large reservoir of that to drive further investment. Let me move on to the future. So that's today, what we have and what we offer, which again is kind of irreplaceable type infrastructure. There's not many cities that have it, and the ones that have it are lucky to have it. The future. So we issued, like many institutions and governments, a 2050 net zero plan, right? And it's going to happen quicker in some cities than it happens in others. Policy will drive it. Assets will drive it. Investment, basically, actually community views on the environment will drive it. But what we know is in some places we're going to get to net carbon zero a lot faster than 2050. And let me give an example of what's going on just up the road, up 95. Two big cities we've studied is Boston and Philly. And because Boston's, as you've heard some of the other speakers, they're, where they are at the end of the gas pipe, it used to be from the Gulf of Mexico, the last stop on the line was Boston. They had suffered through price spikes, shortages, interruptions. So policy has driven things a bit differently in Boston than maybe in Philly. But one of the things that we really changed our whole view of our business with electrification. If we went back 5 years ago, we would say electrification is frankly crazy and it's our competition. What we finally realized is you can't avoid the fact that methane use is going to continue to go down and renewable capacity is going to continue to go up, period. So we really looked at what are the factors around electrification, and some of those have been talked about. But if you look at a city core, when you're talking about electrification, you're talking about buildings, either existing buildings retrofitting, extremely expensive. They got to do major surgery on their building to put in heat pumps, for example, change from what they have today, because heat pumps are, as other speakers have said, 300, 400, 500% efficient. Okay? But then they have to go buy retail power, which is expensive. So it's a tall order of business for existing businesses, okay? For new businesses, they got to be a little bit worried about cities that are trying to say, wait a minute, I've got to get X number of gigawatts into this city in the next 10 years to be able to deliver. Let's say the offshore wind farms come on, and they will. It's happened around the world. It's happened in Texas. It's happened in the Midwest. That's a challenge for new buildings because they're trying to project what's the cost of that distribution tariff going to be in the future, okay? So we started thinking about this and said, wait a minute, in our big cities like Boston and Philly, we have big power plant, a big CHP plant, combined heat power plant. We're connected to the grid already, the high voltage grid, which means wholesale access, which means wholesale pricing, which means we're already on the backbone of the grid. We're not out on the distribution system. And we looked at it and we said, wait a minute, we can electrify, do it quickly, and we can do it economically, and the buildings that are attached to us don't need to do a damn thing. Pretty good. So I'll give you the quick version of what that means. First version is large-scale industrial electric boilers. So we can import right off the grid. We're already attached. We're already moving on this in Boston, frankly. We've already designed this, and we're out taking bids on phase one. So large-scale electric boilers pull power off the grid, and that's not inconsistent with the fact that the CHP is running. So the grid still will tell for now, while those plants are still viable, to make power. It's not inconsistent. We can also be buying power at the same time that's renewable. So we'll buy that power, we'll convert it at 100% efficiency. That's good. It's not heat pump conversion, but it's still 100%. So all the electrons that come in, steam comes out the back end. Now remember, I want to make a point here. Our district energy systems that use steam to move energy around, steam isn't a fuel. It's an energy delivery process medium, just like electricity. So if you look over time, our plants used to use coal, then they used oil, then they went to gas, now they're CHP. So the next step when we go to electrify and use renewable electrons, the steam doesn't care. It's just moving energy around. It already exists. That network's in the ground and it's connected to the buildings. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to pay for it. It's there. So that's step one. Step two is we heard a lot of talk about heat pumps. Okay. Well, just like in Boston and Philly, we sit on two rivers that we use today. We pull water out of those rivers today and use it as cooling in our plants. We already designed, and this will be the first of its type, industrial scale heat pump complex. It's not the type of heat pumps you're going to get in your home, in your hospital, in your commercial building. They use very different refrigerants, and you basically are not going to get them permitted in those type of environments because there's hazards related to them, which are fine in an industrial complex, not in your house, not in your hospital. We will end up using electricity, and today it could be brown electricity. In the future, it'll be that renewable electricity, and we will steal energy from the Schuylkill and the Charles at a 400% efficiency, just like previous speakers talked about. And we have multiple purposes for that in our facility, to preheat, feed water in our systems, or to make steam. So again, a renewable source of highly efficient power using our existing asset class. The final piece of that is when you look at what happened in Texas, and when you looked at what happened in other markets where large-scale wind came into being, it's very disruptive to the power markets because the wind blows at times when you don't need the power. So we all talk about storage, right? Everybody, the whole storage issue. Storage is challenging to site. You need lots of storage to take gigawatts of wind and move it from when it blows at night in the winter to the morning when the buildings need heat, right? So you need electrical storage. We've under-designed large thermal storage facilities on our plants, like at Schuylkill, or in the case of Boston at Kendall, where we'll have molten salt batteries. So in the middle of the night, when power pricing for wind is zero or negative for wind power, that's what happened ubiquitously in Texas. It's happened in every market where you get this introduction of renewables up against conventional fossil plants that set the market. We will be able to buy that electricity, convert it to steam if it's at the right time. If not, we'll melt salt, and in the morning we'll make steam with it. So these are all existing technologies. On a scale of magnitude, they're not that expensive, and it's all proven technology, and our facility is uniquely situated to do that. So if you think of it this way, today we're sitting on this energy distribution network that's got the biggest CHP in the state we should use more of, big tool. In the future, we've got an energy network that can change primary fuel sources and has 4 times over its history, the next one being renewable power. It represents a tool that for a downtown where energy density needs are very high, it's really hard to replicate. So I've spoken with some of the folks who are on the last panel about the geo networks. They're fantastic. They're great in residential neighborhoods and in some lighter commercial neighborhoods, like the Navy Yard may work. When you get into urban cores, it's very challenging to pull that much energy out of the holes you punch in the ground. So we need all these tools. And I think what we really represent for Philly is a great big tool for Center City, for West Philly, for basically the dense construct of Philly that's high rises and big buildings. and we can decarbonize rapidly. And here's the final kicker, too, on kind of where we stand in this. I told you we've designed it. We're moving forward. We put out our first commercial offer to a big life science company up in Boston that's going to build a multi-million square foot life science complex. And it's based on, we call it e-steam, right? Electric-based steam, renewable-based thermal. And we're in striking distance of natural gas. Now think about that. We're in striking distance of the price of natural gas boilers and them going to the grid and buying power and having renewable-based thermal. Because we can do it so much cheaper at our plant, we're sitting on the backbone of the grid, and we already have the distribution network in place. So again, for these cities that are lucky enough, and I know, for example, we're leading the way on this. Con Ed came out with their podcast recently and said they're considering it. They covered a bit of this in their own study on what to do for their diversification and how their steam network could work. They're following our lead. I think we're really leading a paradigm shift for district energy, where wherever these districts exist, where you've got a central plant where you can make a change and then touch all of the buildings on it, that's the place to make these changes and grab big chunks of cities, big swaths of buildings in these rapid conversions. So, I mean, I think we're really excited about it. And then, another point to make is I mentioned the funding available. We recently were acquired by a fund. Okay, when we went to market to sell these district energy assets, we had over 100 funds respond. I didn't know there were that many funds, honestly. 50 asked for a book, 30 bid. There is such a mountain of money out there, low-cost capital, private money that's trying to invest in these type of energy, this type of energy infrastructure. We're ready to grow with Philly and help decarbonize, and we've got the technical wherewithal, the existing assets, and the financial backing to do it. And we just hope that Philly recognizes it as, all the tools need to get used, and we want to be part of that solution. And to the extent we can partner with PGW to do that, because remember, all of the fuel that we burn in that big CHP comes through PGW, at present. So we're a bit joined at the hip now anyway. So I don't think it's inconsistent for us to try to work together and figure this out. So with that, I think that would wrap up our position kind of on future, present benefits and future potential with our system in Philly.
Thank you for your testimony. I actually had a question about the distinction between vicinity and heat, and you kind of answered that in your presentation. So I appreciate it and provide a lot of perspective on in different capacities where vicinity could partner with PGW. They currently partner with PGW, but also going to the future. So thank you for your testimony. Ms. Murphy?
Hi, thank you. I am in my car now, so I hope you can excuse me. I'm in the process of picking kids up from school. So I will read my testimony. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. To quote the Enquirer's editorial board, Philadelphia needs to think creatively about ways that the utility can utilize its workforce, revenues, and, if appropriate, existing infrastructure in a way that solidifies commitment to jobs, housing justice, and climate change. The energy future of our city depends on it. I would like to draw attention to the footnote number 19 in the E3 PGW diversification study. I believe there is great value in paying attention to what is not being said. Footnote 19 basically clarifies that the decarbonized gas option still emits carbon. The devil is in the details here. Not only would the so-called decarbonized gas method be terribly expensive for Philadelphia's already overburdened residents, it would also not really decarbonize the system that we're trying to decarbonize. The full cost and toxicity issues, including storage, are omitted from the study. So too are the full life cycle costs of the for-profit industry. One cannot simply ignore the life cycle carbon emissions of fuels because the life cycle actually matters. There is a growing body of work that has been emerging in recent years addressing the human rights and rights of nature implications of fracking and climate change. I have seen the industry's destruction with my own eyes. I have seen its invisible toxicity through a FLIR camera. I have smelled the air. I have gotten sick to my stomach, developed headaches, sinus pains, nosebleeds, and congestion in short visits to gas patches. At one landfill that collects fracked waste, my tongue went numb when I removed my mask. 16 people on that street have had cancer since they started receiving fracking waste. Only 3 of them were alive at my last visit. Stories of toxicity, illness, and death are everywhere in fracking areas. Mothers and fathers wonder how their teenagers developed rare and fatal cancers that took the lives of their children and others in neighboring school districts in shale communities. This E3 study admitted in a footnote that biomethane and synthetic natural gas still release CO2 into the atmosphere, yet the study falsely represented these carbon-emitting processes as carbon-neutral fuels. The E3 study omitted the human rights violations entangled in the so-called decarbonized process too. Morbidity and mortality did not even make it into the footnotes. The inaccurately named decarbonized gas process would bring high costs to Philadelphians and still have the unwanted negative and far-reaching health consequences of pollution. It is a false solution. A greenwashing, for-profit overreach that will ultimately endanger our health and shared climate. The city need not bother stagnating an industry-pushed false solution while there are sustainable solutions under our feet. PGW started its business in gaslighting. They have changed business models to meet the needs of Philadelphians along the way. Let's leave all carbon-emitting processes in the past and move toward the genuinely clean energy solutions for our city and not allow PGW to go back to gaslighting us. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to thank this entire panel for offering the various perspectives that you provided this afternoon. Are there any questions from members of council? Seeing none, and also just to remind the previous panelists and also current and future panelists, if you have your testimony in writing, please send that to my office. So that way we can use that going forward to try to publish all of the testimony working with the Office of Sustainability, so people who are not able to attend or had to leave early can see the information that's been provided this afternoon. Just want to thank all of you for your patience and your information to add to today's conversation and making it a robust dialogue. With that, Mr. Iannuzzi, if you could call the next panel.
Logan Weldy, Staff Attorney and Director of Legislative Affairs for Clean Air's Council. Adam Nagel, Campaign Manager for Penn Future. Flora Cardoni, Field Director for Penn Environment. And Tom Schuster, who is the Clean Energy Program Director for Sierra Club PA Chapter, provided his testimony but had to leave. I'll make sure that that gets circulated to the members of both committees.
Okay. And that
I'm actually still here for
my apologies.
A few more minutes. I have to leave at 4.
Okay. So if we could have each person, based on what was stated by Mr. Iannuzzi, state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Tom, do you want to go first so that you can get your time in?
If that's all right.
That's right. Fine.
Okay.
That's okay with the panel. Please proceed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Schuster. I'm the Clean Energy Program Director for the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. Sierra Club recognizes that time is running out to address the climate crisis and that we must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and eliminate them by 2050. And we're pleased that the city and PGW are exploring options for decarbonizing the gas utility, but the final report and its recommendations lack the urgency and the ambition that the climate crisis demands. Despite acknowledging on page 4 that the necessary scale of the transformation is significant, indicating that near-term action is required in order to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. In order to remedy this, we urge the city to do the following without delay. First, design and implement an actual networked geothermal pilot project. A Philadelphia-specific feasibility study could be useful, but the completion of such a study should not be a prerequisite for initiating a real-world pilot project. In fact, one or more pilots would prove to be very informative to such a study. And I think that based on comments earlier, that may be the direction that we're headed, but we need to move quickly on this. Second, immediately address the report's page 5 finding. The PGW's existing legal and regulatory structure and cost recovery mechanism does not position the utility to be able to support achievement of the city's carbon neutrality goal. The utility must have the flexibility to provide services other than gas delivery and collect revenue for those services. And third, set interim mandatory GHG reduction targets for PGW for each 5-year interval between now and 2050. Such goals and progress reports toward them are critical to ensure near-term action that the report recognizes is necessary. We also urge the city not to be distracted by so-called decarbonized gas in the near term. As the report notes, its projected expense is exorbitant and its use will only spur electrification and defection from PGW's gas system. In addition, the emissions benefits of intentionally generating additional methane from biological sources are suspect, as even modest leaks during production, storage, or distribution and delivery will cancel out the climate benefits of displacing fracked gas. Biomethane is still methane and is very damaging to the climate, and therefore the use of decarbonized gas should be limited to end uses that prove particularly difficult or expensive to electrify, which should happen much later, if at all. We fully support the recommendation to ramp up existing weatherization programs to reduce gas consumption, particularly by low-income customers. However, we're very concerned about the so-called novel financing opportunities that may expose low-income customers to additional financial risk or even service termination. The city should look to expand the availability of grant funding to cover expanded weatherization programs, and fortunately, there are new possible sources of funding emerging, including allowance proceeds from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and the Federal Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Thank you very much for your time today, and that is all I have.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. If the next witness can state their name and then proceed with their testimony.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Logan Weldy, and I am Legislative Director and a Staff Attorney at the Clean Air Council. Council is a nonprofit health organization headquartered in Philadelphia with the mission of protecting everyone's right to a healthy environment. And the council and its members share a direct interest in the long-term viability of the city-owned utility, including its workforce. And I will note here that my grandfather was a proud career PGW employee. The council has submitted more detailed comments, so please review those as well as listening to my testimony today. The council strongly supports continuing to meet on this topic and encourages the committees on finance and transportation and public utilities to hold additional joint hearings into the need for PGWs to diversify its operations beyond fossil gas. We're happy to see that this study was undertaken, and E3's presentation today highlighted a few very promising proposals. But the council believes there are issues with the study. The most glaring flaw in the study is its underlying assumption that the city-owned utility must continue to operate primarily as a gas utility. And Mr. Shapiro's testimony today did not allay these fears. It was essentially an infomercial for continuing to use gas. And the statement from Keith Holmes, president of PGW's union, quote, "There can be no dispute that if the city were to somehow eliminate natural gas as a source of energy, all of these good jobs would be lost and could not be replaced with a viable alternative," unquote. This appears that one of the most important players in the potential transition and hopeful transition has already made their decision to oppose anything but business as usual. And as Susan Phillips stated in the headline of her article, is PGW on board? And at this point, it's worth noting PGW has advocated for a statewide law that would severely limit Philadelphia's ability to reduce its carbon use from gas use and possibly make it unlawful to do any of the proposed alternatives outlined in this study. Mr. Shapiro did not admit to lobbying for it, but Council Member Gim asked some very good questions, and contrary to Mr. Shapiro's testimony, they did convey their support of the preemption bill through the Energy Association of Pennsylvania's testimony at the state's hearing, and more than a dozen emails were exchanged between PGW executives and the bill's sponsor's office, Senator Yaw. In defending the sunshining of communication, PGW executive said, quote, "My communications with PGW's lawyer reflect strategy used to develop or achieve successful adoption of Senate Bill 275, in that they analyze particular language in the bill and similar laws." That sounds a lot like advocating for that bill, not just providing technical support or technical information. Mr. Shapiro mentioned all the emails and said it's inappropriate to point to a few statements in them, but they're pretty damning. And there were other forms of communication, very likely, that weren't discovered through Freedom of Information right-to-know requests. Clean Air Council has called for City Council to investigate this action and what laws may have been violated, and we would ask that you demand that PGW cut ties with the outside lobbying organizations like AGA. Spend that money on Philadelphia infrastructure and Philadelphians. Wanted to address another issue that was brought up. Yes, we use gas in our electricity supply, but that's not a reason to continue using gas in our city. There is a big difference, so please don't fall for this false argument in support of continuing to use gas in Philadelphia. The grid is cleaning up, and it will be predominantly renewable in the coming decades. But more importantly, as I'll address in the comments, local gas usage is dangerous to our health and safety and is more expensive in the long run. There is no justification for the assumption that continuing business as normal is the best path forward, and starting with that premise substantially limits future options for the city and the city-owned utility. Unfortunately, this resulted in a weak and unambitious study. The council believes hearings should result in mandating that OOS, Office of Sustainability, quickly commission a more rigorous study that would move the city-owned utility away from being mainly a gas utility. However, there is enough in this study for City Council to require PGW to quickly begin diversifying its operations. In support of our views, we offer the following points. Transition away from fossil gas and as necessary to meet carbon reduction goals and maintain the health of Philadelphia's citizens. You've heard from a few presenters today about indoor air quality and its effects on citizens, and also the methane leaks in Philadelphia and explosions. Diversify PGW's business, and that's a more prudent strategy to manage the financial risk that Philadelphia residents will face should PGW continue to exclusively operate as a gas company. There are significant market and regulatory risks now facing the U.S. gas industry. Gas utilities across the United States are examining alternative future business models, as you've heard from previous speakers today. The best path for PGW to manage the risks facing the gas industry is to substantially diversify its operations. In addition, decarbonization of the existing fossil gas system will be a transition of enormous complexity and scale. PGW will better manage the transition if it acts promptly and deliberately. This will avoid the need for sudden and costly changes that a delay would bring. The study overlooks several important aspects of PGW gas operations and the gas transition, such that the potential for alternative business models to meet Philadelphia's heating needs may in fact be greater. In particular, the study does not adequately incorporate the cost of gas storage, the asymmetric risk to Philadelphians from dependence on renewable natural gas, and the trend of declining costs for heat pumps. The committee should build on the study's recommendations and go further to require specific and concrete requirements for PGW to execute the recommendations contained in the study. The study is an important first step in transitioning Philadelphia's fossil gas heating system to a decarbonized future, but it's only the first step. The council submits for your consideration the following. PGW should develop a weatherization finance and service business. The committee should build on the study recommendations and go further to require PGW submit a weatherization business plan within 6 months. PGW should immediately undertake a pilot project for network geothermal districts. Call on OSS to commission a geothermal feasibility study. Ask PGW to develop a site selection process for the district. Ask PGW to complete a cost estimate to transition an existing neighborhood. Ask OSS to complete a cost estimate to construct housing utilizing the Geo District. And I would mention here that Susan Phillips, again, had another article yesterday on geothermal, and it's an important read if you haven't seen it, which I assume you have. Should also require PGW to develop organizational capacity around a tactical thermal transition to understand the key reliability and revenue interactions between gas and electric systems on a block-by-block level. Require Office of Sustainability to convene a regulatory reform task that would specifically analyze the obstacles to new business models and systematically identify possible solutions. Make approval of the PGW operating and capital budgets conditional on implementation of these recommendations. Councilmember Bass stated this earlier. If it's not in the budget, it's just not going to happen. So you have the power of the budget, and you should use that. That's all for my comments, and I appreciate your time and welcome any questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Weldy, for your testimony. I'm not sure if Ms. Cardoni or Mr. Nagel is next, but please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Green. My name is Adam Nagel, and I am the Philadelphia Campaign Manager for Penn Future. I would also like to thank you, Chairperson Green and Chairperson Johnson, for taking the time to call this committee hearing, and I would like to thank the other committee members as well. Penn Future is a statewide environmental advocacy nonprofit. We are leading the transition to a clean energy economy in Pennsylvania and beyond. We are protecting our air, water, and land, and empowering citizens to build sustainable communities for future generations. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss the sustainability and diversification of the Philadelphia Gas Works. We believe that this hearing has already provided and will continue to provide all of us with important information on the diversification study, the recommendations contained in that document, and the urgent transition PGW away from its reliance on fracked gas. The diversification study makes clear PGW's position as a gas utility and its desire to remain one. This should come as no surprise based on PGW's testimony during City Council's previous hearing on this topic in 2019. In fact, we believe that a straight line can be drawn from PGW's previous testimony to much of the findings and recommendations in the diversification study we are hearing about today. PGW's previous testimony focused on the use of renewable natural gas, or RNG, or decarbonized gas to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. Not surprisingly, the study's third recommendation calls for a local carbonized gas program where PGW partners with other city departments to convert waste into biomethane. While replacing frack gas with biogas seems like an obvious solution, it doesn't always work. Biogas has a much lower methane content and can contain much more CO2, along with many other chemicals. It isn't the drop-in replacement we would like. That is where RNG comes in, because it is biogas that has been refined to a better substitute for frack gas. Although it would seem safe to conclude that burning a biofuel is better than burning a fossil fuel, trading frack gas for a lower emitting version is not the ultimate goal. The city's diligent climate research makes clear that we must transition PGW to a sustainable energy that achieves net zero carbon as rapidly as possible. RNG cannot play a leading role in this transition because, as the study itself makes clear, it is more expensive to produce, does not contribute to air quality improvements, and it is limited in terms of commercialization or total availability. Incorporating hydrogen into PGW's operations presents many of the same challenges as other forms of RNG. While it's technically possible to use hydrogen instead of gas for heating, cooking, and other applications, it's simpler and cheaper to electrify. Because hydrogen is a very tiny and light molecule, it leaks at any opportunity. Large-scale use of hydrogen would require we either retrofit or build out entirely new distribution networks, both under our city streets and in many thousands of existing homes. That would be prohibitively expensive. Ultimately, the study's second recommendation surrounding the use of geothermal energy carries the most promise, as we have heard detailed already today. Penn Future strongly supports the pursuit of network geothermal district systems to fully transition PGW from frack gas. We hope that the proposed feasibility study is completed quickly and a pilot program initiated so that any potential barriers can be identified and proposed solutions be set into motion with all possible speed. Of course, PGW must play an active role in this critical work, but additional questions have been raised regarding its commitment to the city's climate pledges and this study since its previous testimony on this topic in 2019, which I think we all can agree was largely reiterated today by Mr. Shapiro. Did PGW provide a statement on the study upon its release? It did not. Did PGW provide any substantive comments on the study or the recommendations contained therein prior to this hearing? It did not. Did PGW work with oil and gas industry insiders seeking to further undermine the city's ability to identify local solutions for local challenges through preemption legislation currently working its way through the General Assembly in Harrisburg? It did so unapologetically, going so far as to say that natural gas will continue to be an essential tool towards carbon reduction. The consequences are numerous from the continued denial, deflection, and delay embodied in PGW's statements and actions, including Mr. Shapiro's testimony today. Ratepayers who are already energy burdened will see their bills increase as others seek out alternative energy sources independent of the holistic transition. The escalating impact of climate change brought on by our reliance on fossil fuels will grow worse, risking further harm to the health and safety of our most vulnerable communities from warmer and wetter weather. Decisive action is required to ensure minimal disruption for PGW's workforce and its ratepayers. Penn Future requests the following to be considered to undertake this work. Set aside the RNG pilot program due to the reasons set out above. Immediately authorize work on the geothermal feasibility study.
Excuse me, Mr. Nagel. If you please make sure your audio is on mute, please, to not interrupt any of our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Nagel. Please proceed.
I'll start over from the last section. Penn Future requests the following be considered to undertake this work. Set aside the RNG pilot program due to the reasons set out above. Immediately authorize work on the geothermal feasibility study, and we would hope incorporating pilot program. And require PGW to place far greater emphasis on building an organization that prioritizes sustainability to better meet the needs of all Philadelphians. The game is not lost. There is still time to forge the latest chapter in PGW's long history and demonstrate that innovation is the most logical path towards a net zero carbon future. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nagel. Ms. Cardone, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Flora Cardone, and I'm the field director with Penn Environment, the statewide citizen-based environmental advocacy nonprofit. Thank you all for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of thousands of our members across the state and here in Philly who are clamoring for real action to tackle the climate crisis. As some of my colleagues here have stated, the science is very clear that to stop the worst impacts of climate change, we must reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 at the latest and cut emissions in half by 2030. I'm here today to testify in support of a full transition of PGW away from gas into 100% clean energy, and to oppose any efforts that will make that transition more difficult. Ending our reliance on dirty, dangerous fossil fuels will help lower global warming emissions, clean up our air, and protect our health. So Penn Environment applauds PGW for including a path forward promoting geothermal energy in Philadelphia's energy mix. Studying the opportunities for geothermal is definitely a positive first step. We're also in support of a plan centered around full electrification, with PGW transitioning completely off of gas into 100% clean energy. And certainly we appreciate the emphasis on weatherization and energy efficiency, which are critical pieces of all of these plans. That being said, some of the other options put forth by PGW in this study will not address the city's energy needs nor reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and therefore our carbon emissions. For example, so-called decarbonized gas and fuel from hydrogen, which are really both pipe dreams that still largely rely on using, burning, and leaking methane gas, which is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, don't improve air quality and are relatively scarce and expensive. I speak in much greater detail about the problems with both of these energy sources in the written testimony I've provided, but the bottom line is that electrification powered by clean energy would be cleaner, more sustainable, more cost-effective, and result in lower emissions than any pathway that relies on expanding this so-called decarbonized gas. Another big question, though, that I have today is how serious is PGW about diversification in the first place? I pose this question because, as Councilperson Gim and Logan both stated, there has been a lot of news coverage about PGW's involvement in drafting this legislation that would explicitly strip Philadelphia's authority to implement these or other policies that would promote diversification of the city's energy mix. This legislation, Senate Bill 275 and its companion in the House, HB 1947 go much further than just hindering building electrification at the local level. It would also have a chilling effect on municipalities' ability to promote solar, weatherization, energy efficiency, or any policies that would have the effect of limiting gas use. PGW responded that they're neutral on the bill and reiterated that today. And while that claim is questionable at best, given their clear involvement in providing feedback to strengthen it, we would think that PGW should have an obligation to aggressively oppose this attack on energy diversification if they truly plan to diversify and help the city meet its climate reduction goals. So I'm here to directly call on PGW to put their money where their mouth is and come out against these bad bills, House Bill 1947 and Senate Bill 275, and ask the Philadelphia delegation to continue opposing these or similar proposals. Ultimately, we owe it to our children, our grandchildren, and the planet to address climate change with an urgent and focused priority. Promoting bills that tie our hands and peddling gas-resilient energy sources masquerading as renewable energy will only exacerbate the problem. So I urge PGW and the city to focus their efforts into electrification and 100% clean renewable energy to ensure that future generations of Philadelphians have a safe and livable climate in the place that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cardona, for your testimony. Thank everyone on this panel for providing your remarks this afternoon. Are there any questions from members of council regarding any of the comments that were made from this panel? Okay, seeing none, and hopefully if you had testimony that was written, I know Mr. Weldy did, others, if you have written testimony, if you could make sure you get that to my office. File all of this testimony for those that will not be able to attend can read it later. But thank you all for your participation. I know it's been some time, but I think each person that's testified so far has provided a robust conversation for this topic for this afternoon. So thank you. Mr. Iannuzzi, can you read the names of the witnesses for our next panel?
Emily Davis, representative from Geodelphia. Jordan Teicher and Duncan Grumko are both members of Philadelphia Democratic Socialists of America. Reverend Cheryl Perch is a representative of Interfaith Power, and Reverend Alan Drew is the East Coast Regional Organizer for Climate Witness Project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi, for those names. If you can testify in that order, we will start with Ms. Davis, Mr. Teicher, Mr. Grumko, Ms. Perch, and Reverend Drew. And state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Hi, my name is Emily Davis and I represent Geodelphia. We appreciate the opportunity to speak. Network geothermal is one of the options listed in the diversification study. We suggest a full physical pilot rather than just a study. A feasibility study could be done at the same time. This is because geothermal is a proven 40-year-old technology. We have several examples already in the city of Philadelphia. Networked geothermal is also not new. There are institutional as well as residential examples of each of these, but each one has a single owner. In Philadelphia, we need a pilot in which multiple...
Ms. Davis, could you hold on one second? If we could have everyone mute because it's interrupting Ms. Davis's presentation, and we want everyone to be able to be fully heard as they're making their presentation. So Ms. Davis, please proceed with your testimony.
I think it's in Philadelphia, we need a pilot in which multiple property owners are involved. Most individual homeowners cannot afford to install a closed-loop system necessary for energy exchange. And in Philadelphia, many homeowners do not have the land necessary to install a system of geothermal. So geothermal must be a utility in Philadelphia. Geothermal could provide heating and cooling, and PGW could sell BTUs as well as maintenance for home systems. Additionally, geothermal can help PGW retain skilled jobs and provide PGW with a stable year-round revenue system. Utility bill payers know that heating and cooling are the most expensive of the utilities. They become more expensive without geothermal. Many homes in Philadelphia do not have cooling systems, but these are becoming a necessity in our warming climate. A geothermal system provides efficient heating and cooling, as other speakers have mentioned. Energy efficiency can be part of PGW's business mix, but renewable natural gas is not scalable and continues to pipe gas through leaky pipelines, emitting climate-harming methane and unhealthy indoor air pollution. Sustainable geothermal technology is the best option for PGW and the City of Philadelphia. A full pilot of network geothermal system must be part of the diversification project. With PGWs trained and experienced to process it for themselves, a public building like a school or a recreation center as the hub of the project, and a heat island neighborhood as the site, the pilot can benefit PGW as well as Philadelphians. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And we got the next witness. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Jordan Teicher. I'm a resident of West Philadelphia and a member of Philly DSA, a local chapter of the Democratic Socialist America. I want to start by stating something obvious. Philadelphia Gas Works is a public utility. We, the people of Philadelphia, own it. That means it should serve us. But who is PGW serving today? Is it serving the people of Philadelphia when its leaders are coordinating with the American Gas Association to lock us into fossil fuels, when they are, in effect, making a mockery of the goals of this diversification study? Is it serving us when it's voting in lockstep with the American Gas Association to vote down cleaner building codes? Is it serving us when it's failing to study the stranded asset risk that accompanies our city's commitment to make reliance on natural gas obsolete by 2050? And is it serving us when it's being run by a nonprofit corporation that doesn't host public meetings, does not publish minutes from its meetings, and releases very little information about its activities? I think we all know the answer. It's time for PGW to start serving the people of Philadelphia, and what the people of Philadelphia want is a PGW that acts like a public utility, not a private business. We want a PGW that acts boldly to address the climate crisis. We want a PGW that expands access to good union jobs. But that is not the vision for PGW reflected in this diversification study. This study assumes that PGW will remain primarily a gas utility. It calls for investing in a renewable natural gas pilot, which is unsustainable, unscalable, and unsafe. It aims for a lower carbon future rather than the zero carbon future we need to live safely in this city and on this planet. And it plans for still more studies, more time to kick climate action down the road. So if the city is serious about the climate crisis, it will immediately remove PGW leaders, including Seth Shapiro, who are working against our climate goals. It will demand that PGW stop paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in member dues, and in ratepayer dues to gas industry trade groups, and it will invite Philadelphians to participate in a democratic process to determine the future of our utility and our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Gromko, I believe you're next.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Duncan Gromko. I'm a member of Philadelphia DSA and a resident of South Philly. PGW and the city that governs it need to get serious about climate solutions that put workers first. We've heard from many other speakers, RNG is not a serious scalable solution to PGW's transition. On the other hand, the diversification study showed that piloting network geothermal, as well as electrification investments and programs like the city's Built to Last program, are the most meaningful way that the city can reduce its gas. Public investment in our city's future will also create good union jobs for gas workers, electricians, and many other building trade unions in the city. We've heard from experts today that many of the skills needed for geothermal are similar to those that gas workers already have. Yet rather than take action, there will be another study that our city has to beg for private money to conduct and will take years to complete. We need the Gas Commission, City Council, and the Mayor to show leadership and govern our public utility for the public good. Instead, PGW continues to operate without accountability, with its employees advocating for a preemption bill in Harrisburg. Speaking of accountability, this hearing itself was made inaccessible. The announcement of the hearing went out only a week ago. It's extremely hard for working people to attend an hours-long hearing during the middle of the day with such short notice. This is not acceptable for such an important public process. I'm calling for the following. Public control. PGW needs to be directly accountable to all Philadelphians. Green union jobs. PGW's future must expand good union jobs and transition to a new model in tight collaboration with the gas workers union. Renewables and electrification. PGW must pilot geothermal and deploy renewable energy technology and electrification to replace its entire gas business. Provide a detailed roadmap with clear goals to ensure that we transition off gas. Protect low-income ratepayers, starting by providing transparent information about shutoffs in the city and the status of people who have lost their gas. Fire Shapiro and PGW executives who have been responsible for contributing to push the preemption bill. And finally, City Council must hold more public hearings and community outreach about this transition of our publicly owned utility. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
I believe it's Reverend Perch. Is that correct pronunciation of your last name? All right, I'm sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute. Oh, wait. No, you're still on mute.
I keep unmuting. Am I still, now I'm okay?
You're good, you're good.
Okay.
Just keep the record and then proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Cheryl Perch. I live in the northwest section of Philadelphia, and I'm the pastor at Summit Presbyterian.
Reverend Perch, did we lose you?
It looks okay, in dozens of congregations in Philadelphia, and it's a locally rooted organizing force for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. Like everyone, we believe multiple crises we're facing call for an all-out, all-hands-on-deck effort. The climate crisis is accelerating, and everything is becoming more extreme. 70% of our city's greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, and at the same time, we're aware that huge numbers of Philadelphians live in homes that urgently need repair and struggle with unaffordable energy bills and shutoffs there in our congregations. And meanwhile, the use of natural gas inside our buildings subjects us to toxic air pollution in a city where 21% of the children have asthma. And finally, PGW and its workers face the threat of a vicious circle of falling sales and rising prices, as people have noted, as the shift away from gas is gathering pace. And PGW executives have refused to take seriously the need for the company to reinvent itself. Our faith traditions teach us that each human being has infinite and equal value. So to build a world in which everyone is truly valued, we must move as quickly as possible to limit the scale of climate catastrophe, guarantee everyone has the energy they need at an affordable price, make sure everyone has a safe, healthy home, and that everyone can obtain a safe living wage job with union representation. We have been excited by the growing push across the country for gas utilities to build and operate network geothermal heating and cooling systems. And we believe, along with many of the other panelists, that this is the most promising for PGW. It's fossil-free, it uses thermal energy infrastructure, using public property, and PGW could lead the way in decarbonizing our city. With long-term investments in the safest, most efficient, most resilient technology available, PGW could ensure affordability, protect union jobs, and create new jobs for the long term. We were disappointed that the business diversification study included minimal analysis of this option, and it does recommend a feasibility study about geothermal networks, but in 2022, another report is not enough. We need action. Gas utilities in other states are developing network geothermal pilot projects now, and so we encourage PGW to do the same and to fully include members of the gas workers union who want to participate. We also agree that the pilot projects on renewable natural gas and would not be helpful. And we also have concerns about on-bill financing for weatherization, although of course we support weatherization. So finally, we say City Council should require PGW to begin testing, not merely studying, the option which would enable PGW to play a role in transforming our energy system and to thrive for decades to come. It's time to plan and build network geothermal pilot projects, and Power hopes to work with PGW, Union, City Council, the Office of Sustainability, and also others to achieve this critical goal. Thank you very much for this hearing and allowing us to testify.
Thank you, Reverend Perch, for your testimony. One thing you stated, which although it's really beyond the scope of this conversation, is a significant amount of fossil fuel energy that's used for our buildings. Just to let people know, we had passed legislation some time ago regarding CPACE, or the Commercial Process Clean Energy Initiative, that allows us to have our commercial buildings to be more sustainable. There's legislation moving through the General Assembly that will allow CPACE to apply to residential or multifamily properties, and we're looking to introduce legislation to enable that to occur here in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you for bringing up that point, because I think sometimes it's lost that our buildings are actually responsible for the core portion of the sustainability and fossil fuel issues that we have. With that, we'll have Reverend Drew, and then take any questions from members of City Council, and then we'll go into our next panel.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Green. I'll state my name. My name is Reverend Alan Drew. I'm an ordained pastor in the Christian Reformed Church. I'm the East Coast Regional Organizer for the Climate Witness Project and an 18-year resident of Northwest Philadelphia. I'm also the organizer for the Hunting Park Community Solar Initiative, or HPCSI, and I'm a 20-year partner and 10-year member of Spirit and Truth Fellowship Church in Hunting Park. So that's a neighborhood that's very close to me. In my work with HPCSI and our partners, we're constantly witnessing the challenges of crumbling homes and high energy burdens for our low to moderate income neighbors. Because they're low income, their energy costs take up a very substantial percentage of their total revenue, which we all know is their energy burden. Furthermore, because they don't have extra cash, they can't afford the necessary repairs to their homes, which in turn makes them less energy efficient, leaking hot air in the winter and cool air in the summer, and costing them more money on energy, which makes things even harder for them. Add to this the fact that Hunting Park experiences summer heat wave temperatures 22 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than cooler parts of the city due to numerous factors related to historic and racist disinvestment. Having heating during the winter and cooling during extreme heat are matters of survival. I think we can agree on that. And yet so many people in my neighborhood and others like it are living by a thread, trying to keep from having these services shut off, and some are already sinking. Now, what will happen to them if PGW continues, as was so clearly presented by Mr. Shapiro, to resist our society's urgent calls and our city's commitments to have it rapidly and strategically transition away from fossil fuels and into clean energy? What will happen, inevitably, is what we call the death spiral. And the death spiral will devastate my low-income neighbors in Hunting Park. It'll devastate them. So what is the death spiral? Well, the social and political pressures to decarbonize have grown massively just over the last few years and will only increase as storms, floods, droughts, and refugee crises continue to grow in our world. So there is most certainly no future for PGW as a natural gas heating company. It's not a future for them. That will end in the near term, whether through a strategic transition to a new clean energy system or through a catastrophic implosion based on collective foolishness and the greed of a powerful few. The catastrophic implosion is the death spiral. So right now, more and more people who can afford to do it are electrifying their heating. I'm one of them. I switched to an air source heat pump system this past summer and haven't turned on my gas to heat all winter. Next will be my stove and my hot water heater, and then I will separate completely from PGW. It's cheaper, it's non-toxic, and it fights climate change. And this movement that I'm a part of is growing, and it will continue to grow. But as this happens, PGW will lose more and more revenue. which will lead it to raise rates on the people who are still paying. Those people will be the ones who can't afford to electrify. People like my neighbors in Hunting Park, they will then go into default. Maybe they'll get some help for a time with taxpayer money, but eventually they'll be shut off. And as this cycle continues, PGW's current model will become impossible to sustain, and it will collapse in on itself, leaving its union workers without work, the city without heat, and the taxpayers with a massive cleanup to fund. Everyone will lose, and the most vulnerable will suffer the most. The other option, I'm almost done here, is to transition urgently and systemically towards a network geothermal system. Plenty of other testifiers have explained why this is the best way forward, so I won't spend any time on that. But what is absolutely not a way forward for PGW, its workers, the poor, or our city as a whole, is continued use of natural gas. That season is over. We need to acknowledge it. PGW can adapt, and we can thrive together, or PGW can continue to bury its head in the sand and cause all of us to suffer together. So my question for City Council today is, will you rise to the occasion in this very urgent moment to defend the poor and oppressed, protect the workers, and secure our city's future by forcing PGW to do what it needs to do? Because it is our utility. It belongs to us. And you oversee it as City Council, as our representatives. So we all know that words are cheap. It's actions that matter, and we need action. And I just want to thank all of the leaders here we've been hearing from who are working with urgency on this. I want to acknowledge it and really appreciate it. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Reverend Drew. Your articulation of the death spiral, although I haven't used that actual phrase, are specifically the reason why this hearing is so important. To educate people in the city of Philadelphia regarding this concern, because if you look at the data from everyone, PGW customers are using less and less gas. And when I use that analogy regarding my sister with an electric vehicle, the concern I have is that more and more people that have the resources will get off of PGW because they have the ability to do so. And although I've talked about this for some time, I saw the first commercialization of that during the Christmas holiday with a company that was advertising on a station how you can use solar and use it as a backup generator as well as provide energy for your home. And so that issue is going to become more and more prevalent as more and more companies start to commercialize the ability to provide solar energy on homes, and it's for the very customers and the citizens of the city of Philadelphia why we need to look at these conversations, and that's why we'll have a follow-up hearing on this issue to give other people an opportunity to testify, but also delve in a little bit more detailed way regarding the geothermal pilot and weatherization, and bring some of the other city departments in to talk about that conversation as well. So thank you for articulating the real urgency of this conversation, and we need to educate many more Philadelphians about this concern. So thank you for your testimony. With that, we're going to have Mr. Iannuzzi read the names for the next witnesses and next panel.
Lynn Robinson, representative from Neighbors Against the Gas Plants. Sean Hogan, member of Philly DSA. Vaughn Campbell. Gail Mershon. Beatrice Zovich. Steve Greenspan. Joanna Ward. Lisa Hastings. Morgan Sorrell, who is a research assistant for the Energy Rights Project. Russell Hicks, and Mitch Channon.
Okay, let's start with, I didn't get all the names, but many of the people I do know, but we'll start with Ms. Robinson. Say your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Robinson. I'm speaking as an environmental and human rights activist, director of Neighbors Against the Gas Plants, and retired Philly teacher. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. The PGW business diversification study was done for a city with a dominant economy often referred to as EDS and MEDS. Yet the diversification working group excluded academics, local health organizations, and local environmental groups. This exclusion may explain why the executive summary begins by using the adjective, quote, ambitious, when mentioning our nation's return to the Paris Agreement and Philadelphia's 2050 climate goals. IPCC reports published after the Paris Agreement revealed the agreement to be not ambitious enough. If we don't cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030, climate change will be irreversible. The city's 2050 goal for carbon neutrality is therefore highly unambitious because it focuses on a clear it lacks focus on a clear benchmark for 2030. For those still fuzzy on this, the EPA science fact about natural gas is that methane is 84 to 86 times as warming to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide in the first 20 years of release into the air. Gas combustion or burning is cleaner than coal, but using gas is actually worse for the climate than burning other fossil fuels because of leaks from drill site to transport port to end use. The executive summary also tosses the adjectives complicated and complex up into the air before approaching any substance. These words sound a warning bell and set the tone of inertia. Some outsiders call that PA conservatism. The complicated nature of Philadelphia owning PGW can be summed up by saying that Philly residents have been completely disenfranchised from its governance. That needs to change. Nevertheless, the conclusions of the study are what matter most. 4 paths forward are identified in the executive summary on page 4. 1. Decarbonized gas is flagged as too expensive, and Philly's leaky pipes make it inadequate for environmental protection. Someone already mentioned footnote 19. 2. Electrification of buildings will improve air quality, yes, but then the study imagines a financial disaster resulting in many stranded PGW assets, potentially resulting in bill increases for customers that do not electrify, end quote. Page 41 in PGW's needed revenue section elaborates, quote, with declining utilization comes increasing average costs, unquote. A disaster like this can only happen in chaos due to zero planning, with PGW forced to maintain all of its current pipelines for less and less gas customers. But PGW can methodically electrify in areas of the city with leaking pipes, eliminate maintenance costs in those areas, and provide electrification subsidies for low-income residents. 3. Hybrid electrification just isn't practical. Who wants 2 heating systems in one house, and who wants a gas plant next to your house? On page 41, the gas industry bias sneaks the hybrid model into both electrification and geothermal scenarios, saying they both need gas backup, which they don't. Number 4, network geothermal. Yes, great idea. And here's why gas backup is not needed for geothermal. It pumps water up from the ground at a constant 55 degrees, no matter what the outdoor weather is. The best pilot project on page 6 for the long term is network geothermal. Weatherization is needed, but should rely on grants, not loans, to low-income people who may go into debt. In conclusion, Philadelphia needs to change PGW's name and make it a renewable energy provider with transparent and democratic governance. That means shut down PFMC and fire any PGW employees who have worked counter to the city's climate and general welfare. PFMC is a board of 7 mayoral appointees that conducts closed-door meetings and gets the rubber stamp of the Philadelphia Gas Commission, which is the democratic face of PGW. The city needs to create an energy provider that is run by and serves the people of Philadelphia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. The next witness, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Hogan. I am chair of the Philly chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. I'm here today cautiously optimistic about the opportunity we have as a city to lead the way on climate justice. Not because PGW has provided any reason for optimism, but because the organizers and experts who have testified today represent the incredible people power fighting for our collective future. It's clear from the E3 PGW Business Diversification Study that the City of Philadelphia has a truly unique opportunity to shift a massive organization and set of assets towards climate justice with a big impact. I'm concerned, however, that the study misses the mark on assessing this opportunity. The study assumed in every scenario that PGW must continue to maintain its fossil fuel infrastructure alongside diversification strategies. We must build a fossil-free, just world. A lower carbon future just isn't good enough for that world. The E3 study needed to assess a better future which all Philadelphians deserve, one in which PGW acts on a plan to shed those fossil fuel assets. Another key assumption of the study is that ratepayers continue to bear all costs for diversification. There's no need to put the burden of diversification on low-income Philadelphians when we can save money by decommissioning fossil fuel infrastructure and fund new infrastructure that we need by taxing the rich. We must unlock a PGW that moves boldly towards a future where workers are guaranteed good union jobs, where ratepayers are guaranteed affordable heat in the winter, and where all of us can breathe easy knowing that Philadelphia led the way to climate justice. Potential solutions certainly need more study, and as mentioned a lot of times today, the best way to study something is by seeing it operate in the real world in a relevant context. As such, I implore the city to develop a pilot for a network geothermal project now. The potential of this technology is massive, and as the study says, we need to know more about it. The city must also figure out which regulations need to change and which funding streams to access, such that the full cost of transitioning is not borne solely by ratepayers. The city should also take active steps to end payments from PGW to fossil fuel associations, to free up more money for pilot projects. While we need studies to create plans, time is running out to address the climate crisis, so the city must commit to action alongside any additional needed studies to build a new future for PGW. As City Council continues to assess the E3 study and consider how to move forward, remember our shared future and that your decisions affect all of us, PGW workers, customers, and Philadelphians for generations to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. The next witness, if you can state your name for the record, I believe that is Vaughn Campbell, to be followed by Gail Mershon, Beatrix Zovic, and Steve Graspin.
Hi, my name is Vaughn Campbell. I am having some audio issues on my end, so I'm going to turn my video back off, and hopefully you can hear me. My name is Vaughn. I live in Mantua. I'm here as a member of Clean Air Council and Reclaim. I'm here to second what others have said and farther push for the city to move PGW out of the gas business entirely. This must be done with either a move to geothermal networks or a push for full electrification. There are simply no other alternatives that are in keeping with Philadelphia's climate goals. Renewable natural gas has been proven a myth time and time again. Studies on the subject from California around other transitions away from traditional fossil gas have found that even apart from the cost of quote-unquote renewable gas, there does not exist enough of it to make even the smallest dent in the utilities' gas delivery to fully transition. Between 1% and 5% of fossil gas could be replaced at most in that study. This is not scalable. Decarbonized gas, as some have pointed out earlier, the term used in the diversification study, quite simply does not exist. It was mentioned earlier that the E3 study admits this. Renewable and biogases are in no way decarbonized. They still have significant emissions over their lifespan. Moreover, unburned fossil gas itself is a greenhouse gas many times more potent than carbon dioxide, and a recent Drexel study revealed that PGW's up to 150-year-old pipes are leaking 4 times as much methane as previously thought, which dramatically spikes PGW's emissions both now and either until gas or much of the pipe system is replaced. So-called decarbonized gas will not help the city decarbonize at all, and I hope that the city will not sink millions of ratepayer and taxpayer dollars into testing and trying a technology that we already know will not achieve our goals. A PGW representative shared a lot of statistics about the grid earlier, and no, Penn's electricity is not yet completely carbon-free, but according to the New York Times, in 2020, it's already nearly 40% carbon-free between renewables and nuclear. Those are statistics from today. Much gas infrastructure is built with 30 or 40-year useful lifespans in mind. So any gas infrastructure that we continue to invest in today will be just as carbon intensive in 2050 or 2060 as it is now. While our heat, if we change, will only get cleaner as our grid improves or as we expand these geothermal networks. Frankly, when it's becoming more and more common around the country for cities to ban new fossil gas hookups entirely, it's embarrassing that a Philly-run organization continues to oppose decarbonization efforts at the state and push residents, businesses, and even Independence Park to add new gas hookups. That's not in keeping with Philadelphia's climate goals. It's not responsible for the city financially to continue in a fossil gas business that can't be made viable and will only get less so. I urge the Council and PGW to pursue the Philly Geothermal Works plan laid out in the diversification study, as it holds the highest promise to deliver a legitimately carbon-free source of heat to Philadelphians at acceptable rates and with the most reasonable transition for PGW's current workforce. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. The next witness, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Okay, is that Ms. Mershon? Okay, we'll call her name again. Beatrice Zovich. Okay, I don't see her. I know Mr. Greenspan is here. If you could state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Steve Greenspan. I'm a resident of Philadelphia and a grandfather. I also volunteer at Power. My career as a scientist and vice president at a Fortune 500 software company was focused on researching emerging technologies and social trends and helping them embrace change. I care deeply about Philadelphia, this planet, and climate justice. 4 years ago, a friend purchased a condominium in Philadelphia. A major selling point was that the building used only electricity for space heating, water heating, and cooking. The units were quickly sold. All electric, no gas. This anecdote illustrates a vital truth not fully captured in the PGW diversification study. Electrification has already begun without PGW. There will be more and more homes and buildings without gas heating. PGW can either embrace change or ignore it. If they ignore it, if they continue with business as usual, customers will pay more to maintain infrastructure that fewer and fewer use. This will be hardest on low-income customers who can't afford to switch. And as revenue dwindles, good-paying union jobs will be lost. This is the death spiral that's been mentioned before. Or PGW can embrace change and diversify in ways that sustain union jobs, support climate goals, and lower customer bills through efficient, innovative infrastructure and business models that don't place the burden of transformation on those least able to afford it. Piloting the falsely named decarbonized gas would waste our money. It would not be environmentally sustainable, not the least cost option for consumers, and not provide new knowledge. On the other hand, networked geothermal systems should be piloted with community and third-party engagement. Understanding the feasibility of networked geothermal systems for Philadelphia and the required job skills and exploring heat as a service business models would be valuable to city and PGW planners. This is the option that can preserve jobs and support climate justice. The legal and other obstacles can be overcome. However, transforming a company like PGW requires executives who are fully committed to the vision, who can provide clarity and transparency, and who can lead with compassion for workers and low-income customers. In the past year, PGW executives have not demonstrated the values and leadership that are needed. Every industry goes through transformations. Kerosene lamps were replaced by electric bulbs, and coal furnaces were replaced with gas. Electrification with heat pumps is inevitable, with or without PGW. Whether PGW will be a leader in this transformation or a niche player with diminishing revenues is up to the city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Greenspan. We had stated there were a few other people that wanted to testify. I called their names earlier that were on our list. That was Gail Marchand, Beatrice Zovich. If they are here, please indicate as such. But there are others that have signed up to testify, and I'll call their names at this time. Lisa Hastings, Mitch Channon, Morgan Serraro, and Russell Hicks had also signed up to testify. If you all could come on screen so you can testify on this topic that we're discussing today. I see Mr. Channon. I know I saw Ms. Hastings, who's also still signed in.
I'm trying to find myself.
Okay. Well, we'll give you a moment. Also, I know Russell Hicks signed up, but I don't see him as still part of. Okay, Ms. Channon's telling me he's not here. Also, Morgan Serraro, who I believe is also still here. I believe Ms. Hastings, that was you speaking. So I'm gonna. Okay.
Yes.
I see you're trying to get yourself together. If you are ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Or if you need a moment, we can go with Mr. Channon and then come to you, because I know you came on the screen and off the screen.
Okay, Mitch can talk first.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Channon, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, and then we will go to our next witness.
Sure. Thanks very much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Mitch Channon. I have leadership roles in the Climate Justice and Jobs team at Power, as well as the Climate Justice Caucus in Reclaim Philadelphia, but I'm going to be speaking for myself, but did just want to state those affiliations. I don't want to repeat too much of what's already been said. I am fully aligned with the calls for immediate moves to pilot network geothermal heating and cooling systems by PGW, and also want to make sure to echo the concern, opposition to on-bill financing for weatherization through PGW. I'm going to just divert from what I had prepared to say because a lot of it is very repetitive, and just wanted to bring forward a couple of other points reflecting on things that I have heard from Mr. Shapiro and from the other witnesses who've spoken today. I was thrilled to hear Mr. Shapiro say that he would like to see PGW invest in network geothermal. I don't believe I've ever heard that from him before, and it seems to contradict some of the other statements that he's made, questioning the value of the environmental benefits of electrification, for example. So that's great. At the same time, I believe that it's really critical for City Council to take strong leadership in directing the evolution of PGW, because I do not believe that the current executive team at PGW has proven themselves to be trustworthy or to be upholding the values and goals that we've been discussing today. And the facts that were brought to light about PGW's role in developing the preemption bill was extremely important. I wanted to name one other really important event that took place in the past couple of years, where PGW voted against upgrades, improvements to the International Building Code that the City of Philadelphia and the Office of Sustainability favored in 2019. I can submit an article about that, as written testimony later, but they voted with and directed their representatives to vote for the positions that the American Gas Association had developed, which were things like opposing stronger energy efficiency standards for gas boilers, improved electrical codes to allow electrification, for example. And that's really unacceptable. If I'm correct, I believe that there will be another move to another opportunity for folks to vote on the building codes in 2022. I think it's every 3 years. And not 100% sure. I'm not an expert on this, and I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it's really important that there be extremely close scrutiny of all of the actions and expenditures of PGW. City Council has the ability to do that when it reviews PGW's capital budget, as does the Gas Commission over the next few months. And I think we really need to understand exactly what is being done, and for City Council to exercise very strong leadership in holding them accountable. I was just looking at advertising from a few years ago when PGW was putting up ads on bus shelters talking about the virtues of liquefied natural gas. That expenditure is inappropriate and should not be permitted. One other thing I wanted to say along those lines, just to make sure to double correct the record, Mr. Shapiro was earlier repeatedly saying we have to understand what he called the facts, and saying that electrification would increase greenhouse gas emissions rather than decreasing them. That is not the finding of the business diversification study. There's a chart on page 29 that clearly lays out their analysis, which shows that electrification with our grid as it is right now would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so his continued repeating of fossil fuel industry talking points is extremely concerning to me, and that's one other reason why I just think it's absolutely critical that City Council lead the way in holding them accountable and ensuring that PGW does what is needed to transform themselves into a provider of affordable heating and cooling services without any greenhouse gas emissions and in a way that protects and creates good union jobs. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Channon, for your testimony. Ms. Hastings, are you able to join us?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. So if you want to come on video, feel free to do so. But if not, we can also hear you, and you can proceed with your testimony.
Okay, great. I'm Lisa Hastings, and I'm a Philadelphian who was opposed to selling PGW a few years ago because I wanted to preserve union jobs and because I believe that the public should have control over future energy decisions. Sadly, keeping PGW public in name only under the management control of private management that opposes the changes that need to be made isn't working. Keeping things the same may also be a dead end for the union jobs in the future. Before I go into that, I also support implementing geothermal projects, which I think should be publicly funded, not based on loans. And I suggest that geothermal projects be initiated quickly for public schools and in all city-approved or funded low-income or public housing developments. I urge City Council to either enter the management agreement or to change the management agreement with PFMC to.
Ms. Hastings, take your time. Go ahead.
Okay. Basically, PFMC is a public entity. They claim that they're not subject to oversight. They're not subject to the Sunshine Act because they're private, but they're running a public utility. We either need to get rid of that management document or revise it so that it reflects current priorities, including public transparency, public information, and environmental needs. PGW needs to be managed as a public entity with emphasis on providing needed energy while maximizing the public interest and operating in concert with, not in conflict with, the city's stated environmental goals. That needs to be in a written document and a reason to sever management. PGW is responsible to the city and its residents, not to the natural gas industry. City Council can also take action right now, or while they're working on a new management agreement, to reduce current pollution and reduce future stranded assets by requiring PGW now to stop spending money on expanding natural gas infrastructure. We have plenty of current ones to fix, and to stop soliciting entities to convert from either steam or even electric to natural gas, and otherwise working to increase the use of natural gas in the city. This is the equivalent of binging on junk food before going on a healthy diet, or binging on alcohol and drugs before committing to sobriety. Please increase geothermal and other clean renewable energy in the city and stop the city from binging on natural gas now. If PGW cannot legally or otherwise transition to generation and supply of renewable energy, then perhaps the city should consider starting a different, totally non-carbon renewable energy utility. I'd like to keep energy in the public sector, but it needs to be renewable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hastings. I'm now going to make a call for anyone else that is here that would like to testify regarding this resolution. Please come on. There we go. Thank you. We called you earlier. State your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Yep, my name is Morgan Sarrow, and I'm speaking to you as research assistant and the fieldwork lead for the Energy Rights Project, and that is a federally funded ethnographic project that's based out of Drexel University, and it's tasked with studying energy vulnerability in the Mid-Atlantic region. Our team has conducted interviews with 336 energy users during the pandemic, and 237 interviewees were recruited from energy conservation workshops held in community centers across Philadelphia. And my testimony is supported by data collected through these interviews. As PGW explores options to decarbonize, it is imperative that Philadelphians with the highest energy burdens are prioritized to ensure that they maintain reliable access to affordable energy. Out of our respondents, 62.5% reported that they are struggling with paying their gas bill currently. And although so many Philadelphians are struggling, more than half of our respondents have never applied for energy assistance for a myriad of reasons, namely not being eligible for available assistance programs and not knowing about assistance programs that exist. Although the diversification study states that protections need to be in place for low-income customers when PGW decarbonizes, the protections that were outlined in the study are disconnected from the realities that low-income customers face. PGW's Customer Responsibility Program, or CRP, was frequently cited in the study as a mechanism which will prevent energy inequalities during PGW's transition. However, many customers who are currently struggling to afford their gas bill reported that they are ineligible for CRP because of the program's rigid income guidelines. And during an interview with a woman who lives in the Strawberry Mansion neighborhood with her family, we asked if she's aware of energy assistance programs that her utility company provides, and the following response is one example of many that our team has had regarding CRP. Quote, yes, but some of the programs we can't go on because my husband is he has the only income in the household, and that kind of sucks. And we're not documented yet, so that kind of sucks too. So basically, everything has to come out of pocket. I think only one program that we are on is the CAP program, and that's with the electricity. And we're trying to get on the CRP program, but they say he makes too much money. But it's only one of him. I mean, it's only him in the household working. So how does he make too much money if, I don't know, it's just confusing. End quote. I was also concerned to see that the diversification study proposed on-bill financing for low-income energy upgrades as an alternative business model. And though low-income households in Philadelphia are desperately in need of energy upgrades, as many have mentioned, customers are already struggling with their monthly gas bills and other expenses, and should not have their options reduced to amassing higher utility debt in order to address their home's energy deficiencies. Our team supports another option that was outlined in the study, which is close to PGW's current business model, where PGW receives funding from state and federal sources to act as a weatherization service provider and extends its weatherization services that it offers to low-income customers to include all of its customers, and with more proficient and community-tailored outreach efforts. We also propose that PGW expands eligibility criteria for CRP so that more households are able to afford their gas bills. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other individuals here who would like to testify on this resolution? Okay, I see I believe that's Miss Ward.
Yes.
Okay, please feel free to come on camera and state your name for the record and then begin with your testimony.
I am on camera.
Okay, we see you now. Okay. Feel free to just state your name and then proceed with your testimony.
Yes, I'm Joanna Ward. I returned to Philadelphia to retire, and I'm having second thoughts with the new information I'm discovering from my research. But so let me say good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. As a healthcare professional, I understand how invaluable clean air and water are for each of us to be able to live a long and healthy life. I've been seeing and learning too many discouraging facts about the air quality here as a result of the shale boom. You know what they do? Frack gas with toxins and millions of gallons of water for natural gas, right? The process is very toxic to communities around it, with increased cancer rates, asthma, and that happens, their collateral damage for the clean energy, that clean LNG gas that burns. From a recent air quality study in Pennsylvania by Mueller at Carnegie Mellon, we now know that citizens living in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia have shortened lifespans as a result of the shale boom in our state. He also concluded that the cost benefit was not worth it, since the money for those dirty, low-paying jobs doesn't stay in Pennsylvania. We must move away from dirty fossil fuel because it is detrimental to our health, and methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas that warms our atmosphere for 9 years after it is released, if not longer. This is worsening our climate crisis, that we're at a serious point with it, as evidenced by increasing numbers of devastating fires and floods, killing people all over the world. And Pennsylvania is the second highest polluter for methane in our union, in the United States, in our nation. Dozens of large homes and buildings already use geothermal, including the city's police academy and the German Society of Pennsylvania. Now is the time to make amends and use the natural gas infrastructure for clean, efficient, renewable geothermal energy, as is successfully being done in Boston and New York. Infrastructure money will help replace weak gas lines that have blown up homes and their residents. That won't happen with geothermal. It will also make a grid for all renewable energy that is our future, to save us and our planet. We don't have to frack with millions of gallons of water loaded with toxins for methane, or to burn coal, fossil fuel, gas, or oil. Geothermal is efficient, renewable, and less costly, especially combined with wind and solar for our electric energy source. Geothermal produces only about 1/6 of the carbon dioxide that a clean natural gas-fueled power plant produces, and very little, if any, of the nitrous oxide or sulfur-bearing gases. One Independence Place buildings are all electric, with efficient packaged terminal air conditioners and heat pumps for heating and cooling. We would appreciate a grid that accommodates wind and solar energy. Our new garage owner is also looking to a better future, with plans for charging stations for electric cars that will be the new 21st century norm, along with electric trucks. The study is totally obsolete for the 21st century. It should be ignored. We need to move to geothermal and renewable energy, and natural gas is not renewable energy. Philadelphia, a city without noise from transportation, sirens, and pollutants, that's the future. I pray that Philadelphia, Pennsylvania becomes a leader in transitioning out of all fossil fuel before it's too late, because we don't know where the turning point is, to no return, the tripping point. And that means we have to do this now, not in 2050, we have to do it now. We must use the new, desperately needed infrastructure money wisely for electric charging stations and public transportation too. And thank you in advance for making Pennsylvania clean by transitioning to a clean energy and bringing with it new green jobs. And if I can answer that councilman's question about what it means to freeze. That person, Mr. Shapiro, did not tell you the truth about what's happening in the plans for this state by water, not by us. That I just learned. We own this. This should be Philadelphia Green Works. That's the new name, and we shouldn't wait 5 years. As soon as we get that infrastructure money, because when you frack for the methane, with all these toxins that are causing cancer in those communities, higher rates, and asthma and early deaths, and then you frack that, you take that dirty methane, and they're planning on doing this in a place north of Scranton, freezing it And when they freeze it so that they can ship it to other countries, raising our prices for it and making profits for it in other countries as we are collateral damage. That's why I don't want to stay here. I fought it in the South Texas and the Gulf Coast, and so far since Biden came, he stopped the Trump thing, and they're going to evaluate it, and that's hopefully not going to happen. That's the last pristine area in Texas. And so when they freeze that, it causes birth defects, it causes cancer. I mean, they put all that nitrous oxide, they put so many carcinogens in the air. We already have PFAS in our drinking water that should never go through a municipal treatment plant. And the national NRDC, they've done studies about all this, and it's detrimental. And hopefully that the DRDC, who I recorded comments with them, will stop fracking in Pennsylvania forever. So please, let's look at geothermal. We already have some of the infrastructure. Don't make it better for gas, make it better for geothermal. It's the same system under the ground. You can do that and be committed for the people. Let's make this really turn it around from one of the worst polluting states in the nation to one of the best. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll make one last call. If anyone else who's here that would like to testify on this topic. This last panel provides some good information. In particular, Morgan's testimony really provides some perspective, as well as others, about why this is such an important issue, because we're dealing with a very complex issue of how do we provide efficient and fair, affordable energy to the city of Philadelphia, 1.6 million residents, roughly close to about 500,000 ratepayers, and we're doing that within a complex regulatory structure. You heard about some of the issues with the PUC and our ability to even do some alternative energy opportunities, and doing that with a unionized labor force that provides great safety to our constituents by having well-trained employees that are working with and at Philadelphia Gas Works. So this is a complex issue. And it's an issue that we will continue to delve in. That's why we'll have another round of hearings on this topic. And hopefully in that second round, we'll be able to spend a little bit more time on some of the pilot ideas that came out of the study, and bring in some other departments that can also provide some perspective on those issues as well. So without seeing any additional witnesses to testify, and I'm not sure if there's any closing comments from any members of council. And if they do, please indicate as such. I know this has been a very long hearing, and I want to commend our stenographer for being here from the very beginning. I apologize for not asking if we needed to take a break earlier, but I want to thank you for being here throughout the entire hearing, as well as all of the other participants and attendees. Seeing no additional comments from members of council or additional witnesses, we will recess this hearing to the call of the chair, which is myself and Councilmember Johnson, who is the chair of the Committee on Transportation and Public Utilities, and we'll continue to work with our colleague, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, who is the chair of the Committee on Environment, to have these committees come together once again to have another conversation regarding this very important topic of diversification of Philadelphia Gas Works. I want to thank everyone for your time and attendance this afternoon for such a robust and engaged conversation concerning such an important topic. Thank you, and have a great day.
you